Okay, thank you very much. So let's start with our meeting. So welcome everyone. We have 53 participants, 54 participants now connected. Before we start with the meeting, maybe a few organizational and technical issues. First of all, I want to inform you that this meeting will be recorded and at the same time it will be also live streamed. So it's the first time that we are testing this. There is a YouTube live stream of this meeting so that you're aware of it. And my colleague Stella will share the link in the chat. So if you would like to promote this or forward it to colleagues who forgot to register and want to participate in the meeting, so please feel free to do so. Also, I would like to recall that please everyone mute herself or yourself when you are not asked to the floor. We will be muting you in case we hear some background noise or so. As already said earlier, there might be sometimes technical problems in muting somebody. In this case, we would disconnect you from the meeting. Don't take it personal. It's just for the benefit of others. If there is a disturbing noise, simply reconnect again. So if it happens that you find yourself kicked out of the meeting, this is nothing personal. It was for technical reasons. Simply reconnect and usually this solves the problem. As we will have a large number of participants, it will probably not be possible to give the floor to speakers who are not on the agenda. We can do this only in exceptional circumstances. We would like to invite you for questions or comments that you have to use the chat function. You have a chat button on the lower right corner of your screen. And then when you have questions, we will try to pass this on to speakers. Yeah, I think that's all I would like to say here. Yeah, I would like to ask my colleague from ECLAC, Alda Diaz, to guide us through this session. Alda has already been introduced yesterday, so I keep it short today, if that's fine for you, Alda. And to guide us through this session today. Over to you, Alda.
Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today again. Welcome everyone to the session 2, Managing Health and Climate Change Related Hazard with Official Statistics. We have a full day ahead and we look forward to diving into conversations started yesterday. But before we do, we'll start to have some context on the step that led us to us coming together today. We are going to have an overview on activities related to measuring climate change and health in the ECLAC region. And we're also going to have another segment related to managing climate change related hazard with official statistics. And then we're going to have a panel discussion. And finally, with a roundup with some conclusions and the closing of the session. So now I'm going to introduce the following 2 colleagues from ECLAC, Mr. Rolando Ocampo and Mr. Omar Bello. Both of them, they are going to do a presentation. I'm going to start introducing Mr. Rolando Ocampo. He is an actuary graduate from Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. He holds 2 master's degrees, one in statistics from the University Complutense of Madrid, and the other master in economics of education and labor from the Universidad Carlos III of Madrid. Between 1984 and 1989, he worked in the National Institute of Statistics in Geography, INEGI. Later on, again in 1994, performs the role of coordinator of methodologies, analysis, and procedures. From March 2013 to December 2017, he was a member of the INEGI Governing Board as Vice President. From August 2013 to December 2017, he chaired the United Nations Regional Committee on Geospatial Information Management for the Americas and was co-chair of the same commission from 2016 and 2017. He's a member of the IAOS Executive Committee, and he was a representative of this committee before the Scientific Programming Committee. Also between several years, 2015, 2017, and 2019. Currently, since August 2019, he's the director of the Statistics Division of Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. And I'm going to introduce Dr. Omar Bello. He is an economist from the Central University of Venezuela, and he holds a PhD in economics from the University of Colorado at Boulder. Between 1999 and 2005, he was an official of the Central Bank of Venezuela, and since 2005, he has been an official of the United Nations ECLAC, where he has worked in the Division of Economic Development, Sustainable Development, and in their Subregional Office for the Caribbean. Currently, he works in the Office of the Secretary of the Commissions, where he is in ECLAC focal point of disasters assessment. Since 2010, he has specialized in the disaster area. His most outstanding work in this area have been coordination of the third edition of ECLAC disaster assessment methodology and the coordination of 14 data reports, and also more than 50 training scores on the aforementioned methodology. I'm going to do a very nice welcoming to both of you, and they are going to present the overview on activities related to measurement, climate change and health in ECLAC region. Please go ahead and welcome.
Thank you very much, Alda. I'm going to share my presentation. Do you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. So good day to all of you. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning. During my presentation, I want to show the situation of the Latin American region on climate disaster statistics, some challenges that we face, what we are doing here in ECLAC, and at the end, some recommendations. So, as you already know, the demand for climate change related data, especially regarding environmental aspects, is greater than supply. We have three global frameworks, among others, that confirm this point: the SDG, the Sendai frameworks, and the Paris Agreement. It is important to mention that of the three pillars of sustainable development, the newer and the weakest is the monitoring and measuring environment, climate change, and disaster dynamics. Climate change poses a considerable challenges to statistical metrics and institutional works, both for member states and UN entities. So we can find insufficient or irregular collection of environmental, climate change, and disaster data within national statistical systems, the use of the newer sources and methodologies. Also, we face the need for institutionalization and regular budget allocation in all national relevant institutions, strengthen the interagency technical capacities and common language, and promote statistical cooperation among relevant institutions. That is why we, in ECLAC, we have been carrying out different activities related to disaster statistics, focusing on the demand-driven interinstitutional capacity building to Latin American and the Caribbean countries, methodological development, production of key regional environment, climate change, and disaster indicators. Also, we are working hard to implement at the country level in our region global frameworks to strengthen the spatial information management and integration with statistics. In addition, just mentioned that ECLAC is a pioneer in the field of disaster assessments and the development of dissemination of the damage and loss assessments methodology data that we call. But my colleague Omar Bello will talk about it in a few minutes. Let me give you a quick photograph of the situation in reference to climate change in our region. I must say that we find more available data when we focus on drivers and impacts, but much less when we talk about vulnerability, mitigation, and adaptation. I just want to show you in this slide how the global concentration of carbon dioxide officially passed the symbolic 400 parts per million mark. It was the point of no return. So you can see it in the red arrow. So it is important to make a change in the current production patterns. Instead, in Latin America and the Caribbean, it is an asymmetrical position in relation to climate change. The region has made a historical small contribution to climate change, as you can see in both blue lines, but we all know it is had vulnerable effects. Some articles are open. Can you close them, please?
I'm sorry, Rolando, we have problems hearing you. Would you please try to?
Do you hear me?
Yes, but it was like a little bit of far. Thank you. Yes.
Okay. So we can evidence by region through statistical data the increase in the average annual temperature for the period analyzed in this trend and analyzed. If this trend continues, this will cause a significant economic cost. In this slide, so clearly we can see in the first figure, it can be observed, the period analyzed, that the occurrence of the most repeated events are hydrological, means floods, and meteorological, means storms. And for the second figure, it is important to mention that directly affect risk over time in our region. The world deaths have increased considerably in the past there has, as a result of some programs. Okay, next slide. It is to point out that 70% of all damages and economic losses correspond to climate change related statistics. But these damage and losses are only part of the story, as most of the disaster reports submitted, some of them do not all the economic data. Air pollution represents a major environmental health hazard. So here in ECLAC, we work and produce a statistical investigation last year. And that has to be with the events of the quarantines and activity restriction related to the coronavirus disease in the air quality. Focus on three key pollutants: fine particulate matter, PM2.5, nitrogen dioxide, NO2, and sulfur dioxide. In some selected cities in the region, there are some about 14% of the Latin American urban population. The cities were Bogota, Lima, Mexico City, Monterrey, Quito, Santiago, and Sao Paulo. For time reasons, we will only show the results of two of the pollutants, PM2 and NO2. So we can see specifically during the 2029 to 2020, the analysis period, the air quality generally improved in the cities studied. Sorry, here's so in this slide, so we can see, so the city air quality improves the most during the initial weeks of the quarantine. After then, so we see that the situation tends to reverse. That represents an improvement in the environmental and human health. So between 1970 and 2020, in the Caribbean, and so 91.7% of the disaster had their origin in meteorological and hydrological phenomena, such as floods, storms, and tropical cyclones. And one of the exceptional features of the Caribbean is that disaster may engulf an entire country. So that's why we decide in ECLAC to design a development account, this development account 12 project to enhance the climate change and disaster risk reduction, statistical and institutional capacity for better mitigation and adaptation. Finally, to conclude, just point some recommendations and main challenges. So we need to produce regional climate change indicators, focusing on the impact and adaptation. Also on environmental, health, impact on agriculture and tourism, among others. We need best use of geospatial data, and we need to support national production of climate change indicators. We still need, and it is very important to develop and implement a lot in our region. So thank you very much for the presentation. Sharing, and I'm going to Omar, please.
Yes, Omar, please present to us the data database, disaster profiles, and policy application. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Well, I will go very quick over these three issues. The outline, I will first talk about the ECLAN recent war on disaster, the data report, and the example of a disaster profile. The data report is a best example of a policy application of this methodology. First, I would like to say that ECLAN has led more than 110 assessments since 1972. I can say that ECLAC is the first institution in the world that devotes resources to disaster assessment. The last 14 data are listed here. I would like in the second part of the presentation I will mention things about hurricane. I will mention the main conclusions of the Hurricane Dorian assessment. ECLAC has done a lot of effort to disseminate the methodology. I would like to mention that we, in 2014, we have a training course with ESCWA, and I would like to say that we can offer a training course for each of the economic commissions that are represented here. Now, using this technology will be very, very easy to do it. It's a 3.5-day training course in this methodology. Well, a data report talking about the policy application. A data report consists of estimation of effects, basically damage, losses, and additional costs. Yesterday, there were some questions about direct and indirect effect of disaster. I would say using this methodology, we can measure the direct effects that are basically the damage, and the indirect effects that are basically the losses and the additional costs. Once we estimate the effects, you can estimate the impacts basically on macroeconomic variables. And the third part of the report consists in recommendation for resilient reconstruction. I will emphasize in the presentation these first two points. The core concept, damage, refers to the effect the disaster has on the assets of each sector, expressed in monetary terms. Basically, here we are talking about the destruction of assets due to a disaster. Losses are the value of goods that go unproduced and services that go unprovided during a period running from the time the disaster occurs until full recovery and reconstruction is achieved. This is very related to the concept of damage. And additional costs refer to outlay required to produce goods and temporarily provide service as the result of a disaster. These are the three core concepts of the methodology, and we can produce several indicators about disaster using these three concepts in the case of the disasters that we assess. Basically, this methodology is based on sectoral information, as we list here. And the first part of any of this assessment is talking about the affected population. And I would like to mention something. For us, the affected population is what we call the primary affected population. That is the main target of the population that is the main target of policy after a disaster happened. And here we include the deceased, the injured, the sheltered, the displaced, and the homeless. Here are these figures for the case of Hurricane Dorian. By the way, in the chat, I put the link to the assessment of Hurricane Dorian and also the assessment of Hurricane Eta and Iota in Guatemala. Okay, well, Here are these concepts measured by these sectors. In the case of Hurricane Dorian in Bahamas, as you can see here, the damage was focused on the social sector, basically housing. The losses were focused on basically the productive sector. In the case of Bahamas, tourism. Okay. In the case of this is very important. We can measure this by institutional sector, public or private sector. And here is, I would say, all the detailed breakdown of the damage and losses, but each of these subsectors. And once we estimate the effects, we can estimate the impact, the macroeconomic impacts related to a disaster. And here, in the case of Hurricane Dorian, basically we estimate in 1 percentage point of GDP the impact of that disaster in the economy. This is also important because not only we estimate this for the national economy. As you know, mainly disasters affect local economy. We estimate this by island. The two main islands in Bahamas that were affected by this disaster were Abaco and Grand Bahama, and we did an estimate. We did an estimate for the GDP of those islands. Also, once the GDP is estimated, you can estimate what are the profits and the wages that are gone because of the disaster. Finally, what we have here, I will present. This is a study that also I put in the chat using most of the assessment before 2010. What we have there, or we can build using this data set, some disaster profile. What is a disaster profile? Basically, we can show using this database, for example, what is the typical effects of a storm, for example, in the Caribbean. How much are damage? How much are losses? And this is in the 2010 study. Given the time restriction, the time constraint that we have, I will just show this related to losses. See that, for example, in the case of the hurricanes in the Caribbean, the sector that is most affected, this is in percentage, sorry, not in US, not in 2000 US dollar, this is in percentage. I will correct this and send you the presentation. These are percentage. Basically, all the losses are on the productive sector. And when you go more in detail, basic tourism and retail. So we know, for example, for the case of Central America, in the case of a storm, what is the, I would say, expected effects of the disaster. We have in this paper all the scenes also for earthquake and, for example, for outstanding rains. So this is basically what I have in the presentation. It was a little bit fast, but I think that I respect all the time constraint that we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Omar. Actually, I give you 2 more minutes, so you were perfect on the time. Okay. Let me see the chat. We have here some comments and questions I will through very quickly. Some comment from Monica Rodriguez: interactions between climate change and demographic, socioeconomic, and other factors, including inequities, is very important to the future burden of climate-sensitive health outcomes, for sure. Then we have some question from Khadija Del Haudi Morocco. Any assessment of the interlinkages between climate impacts and COVID-19 effects? Please, Orlando, would you please answer this?
Yes. Well, we have to be very careful because with the climate change effects in this pandemic. So we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, and everybody, we saw a lot of videos with birds in the urban areas, and so the whales very close to the sea, to the beach. So we have an outbreak of our climate constitution in the country and in the world, but after the pandemic, and because of the decline of the GDP in all the world and the countries, so the countries will have a lot of incentives to produce and to create with the industries and to create more pollution and to create more climate change effects. So it is so we have to be as a statistician very careful in trying to measure these effects, because the incentives of countries to produce and to on behalf of the growing of the GDP and employment and all those aspects, so that can cause a lot of struggle in the climate change in our countries. So I think this is fine.
Thank you very much, Orlando. Then we have another question. Why SDGs indicator and Sendai don't talk about loss and damages concepts that are part of the climate change negotiation process? Omar, would you please answer this question?
Well, I think that, yeah, I think that I cannot answer the question because I cannot say why. Okay, I cannot answer why this is not happening. I think that this is very important because I would say that this methodology, in the case of all climate-related disaster, you can have a direct measure. Related to the question that Rolando asked, that Rolando answered, I want to complement something and say that in the case of COVID-19, is very I would say is a different ballpark now, the COVID-19 context, because what we can have is at the same time we have simultaneous disasters. For example, in the case of Central America, basically Nicaragua, Guatemala, and Honduras, last year what we have was the COVID-19 disaster, and at the same time we have Hurricane Eta and Hurricane Iota. Okay, and for us was, I would say, a good intellectual challenge to measure to differentiate the effects between the COVID-19 and those hurricanes. I invite you guys to read the report about the Guatemala assessment that I put on the chat. Unfortunately, it's just in Spanish. Because ECLAT write the reports depending on the language of the country that is affected by a disaster. Okay.
Thank you, Omar. I only take these two questions because we're out of time, but we have three more questions that we're going to see at footer. I would like to thank you, Rolando and Omar, for your presentation. Were very useful for our conversations, and I hope to see you again soon in this context. Thank you very much, both of you. So now, thank you. Now I'm announcing the next segment of the session, which will discuss benefits and challenge of managing health-related hazard with official statistics. So I'm introducing Dr. Kutsia Huda from WHO. Dr. Kutsia Huda is the head of Disaster Risk Management and Resilience Unit in the Health Emergency Program of World Health Organization headquarters. In her current capacity, Dr. Huda is the WHO focal point for disaster risk reduction and responsible for implementation of Sendai framework targets for health sector and health system, health facility safe from disasters, and whole of society health emergency and disaster risk management in countries. A physician by training, Dr. Huda graduated from a Faculty of Medicine at Dhaka University, pursued her master in Population and International Health from Harvard University, and the Humanitarian Studies Initiative Program of Harvard University, Tufts University, and Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She has diplomas in health economics from the Dhaka University and health program management from the University of Leeds. Dr. Huda brings 24 years of experience in health emergency risk management and humanitarian work across the world. She held several executive leadership positions across multiple regions of WHO and in countries to lead emergency preparedness and humanitarian response actions. Before joining WHO, Dr. Huda worked as a medical faculty of Dhaka University and led the work of Bangladesh Center of Health Emergency Preparedness and Response under the Ministry of Health. Please, Estela, okay, now we have the PPT now. Please, Mrs. Cuida, go ahead, thank you.
Thank you, Ada. Do you hear me?
Very good, Dr. Cuitza.
Okay. Thank you, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm honored to be invited at this expert forum today to speak in front of this esteemed audience engaged in dealing with national and international disaster statistics, which is so critical for all the disaster work we do. I would like to thank the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction for this opportunity. So today I would like to share with you, do you see my slides?
Yes, we can see.
Yes, we do. We do.
But the problem is like I can't change the slide. Okay, now it's fine, I guess. Thank you. So I would like to start with showing some frameworks that are key for our work in health emergency and disaster risk management. I'm sure that the first one, you all know about it very well, and this is why we are all together. In the health sector, we have this international health regulations, which is an instrument of international law that is legally binding over about 196 countries. So this framework, these regulations are being used to develop the country capacity for any public health concern of international concern of public health emergencies and disasters. So then, based on actually these two documents and also taking forward the Sendai implementation to the countries, WHO developed and published Health Emergency and Disaster Risk Management Framework, which builds on Sendai framework, of course, and international health regulations, and also Paris Agreement. And then this helps to cascade all this implementation of the framework towards the Sustainable Development Goal. I'm also showing you the GPW, that our triple billion goal objective of WHO to reach out more people in this current biennium. And you all are aware perhaps that GPW is WHO Global Program of Work, where Sendai framework related health indicators are referred. And then through this GPW, actually all the country level health work plan are designed to implement the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction along with other health priorities. So I'm also sharing this document here, that COVID-19 Strategic Preparedness and Response Plan, which is again also one of the strategic document to support the countries to respond to COVID-19. And you can see that there is a monitoring and evaluation framework attached to this document. So you can see that this whole COVID-19 response are being monitored through some indicators. And then last but not the least, this WHO Manifesto for Recovery, which aim at creating a healthier, fairer, and greener world while investing to maintain and resuscitating the economy hit by the effects of COVID-19, including the climate change impacts. So all these frameworks are actually helping the countries in the health sector to contribute to sustainable development goals and resilience. Now I would like to show you this health emergency and disaster risk management cycle, that how it works, how we are actually working with the country's partners to reduce the risk in communities and within the health sector. So here I'm just showing that these different stages of health risk management, from prevention, preparedness, readiness, response, and recovery. And then I'm just showing that under each stage and how the information are being helpful, and then how what are the information we collect and how this information are being used in different actions from policy to practice that we do. So one of the example for the prevention, that we need information for exposure, vulnerability, coping capacity, and critical infrastructure, which is again the mandate of Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, that includes health facilities and hospital. And the way we collect this information, we are supporting countries with this various methodology, a strategic tool for assessing risk, vulnerability risk assessment and mapping, surveillance, joint risk assessment for One Health. And then what we are doing with this information and the prevention time, we are generating early warning for health emergencies. We are using this information for risk reduction intervention, mitigation of climate change impact as well. So basically, disaster statistics provide evidences to all the actions from policy to practice, as I just mentioned, from national to subnational level. So you can see that preparedness, readiness, response, and the recovery. So I put together the types of information we need, how we are actually collecting this information for the countries, and then also what are the uses of this information. And of course, apart from the operational use of this information, all this information are also contributing to develop health-related emergency disaster risk management policy strategy, helps in coordination, decision-making, risk communication, not to mention monitoring and evaluation. We only manage what we measure. That's why numbers are very important for health emergency and disaster risk management. And that's the reason it's impacting, you can see that as much as it is operation and also the decision-making process as well. I would like to draw your attention to this slide, the report from Independent Panel on Pandemic Preparedness. You can see that there are a lot of information that were used. And then, by the way, I was actually asked in the first session, so I'm just giving you advanced information that I'm sure that the presentations will be available to all of you. At the end of the presentation, in the last slide, all the links are there to dig into the sources of information and also various documents that I'm referring to in this meeting as well. So you can see that while morbidity, mortality are important for the health sector intervention, it is equally important to understand that how this health emergency from this biological hazard is impacting the other sectors, because these sectors are interdependent, and actually this interdependency of the sectors work together to contribute in the development of the countries. You can see that when the information related to health workforce loss is important, and equally important that how the percentage of children, whether they're able to attend the school, at the same time gender-based violence, increase in gender-based violence during this pandemic. These are very important because when we respond to an emergency situation, it is important to have a comprehensive approach to response. So you can see that how there's different statistics that different sectors are coming up with. We are using it for health sector response and preparedness. This is another report, Global Preparedness Monitoring Board report, which 2020, which report calls for 5 distinct actions. You can see here that responsible leadership, engaged citizenship, national and global systems for global health security, sustained investment, and global governments for preparedness and emergency response. So this Global Preparedness Monitoring report, when it highlights the need for science and evidence-based responsible leadership, equally highlights the need for inclusiveness and social protection. And then those actions refers to different information, different statistics here. So you can also see that, you know, how the statistics can be used in the health sector, emergency and disaster risk management. We learned evidence-based decision-making save more lives and protect livelihood. That's where the importance is. This is also important. I'm sure that in this session, like a lot of people will be referring to this document, because this document is one of the key documents that we all refer to. Actually, this document brings all of us together. And we, in the previous presentation, people mentioned, like, you know, the speakers eloquently mentioned that engagement and how we can talk the same thing and how we discuss the same thing together. I think this is one of the key documents. In health sector, we use this hazard classification because we are moving from event management to the risk management approach. This is a paradigm shift in the actions in the health sector. And also international health hazard classification, it has got immense importance in health sector risk management. It allows us to focus in risk management, helps us to address the challenges of concurrent emergencies. And then I can give an example that the hurricane season, Atlantic hurricane season in the US has already started on the 1st June, which is going to continue till the end of November. So this creates the opportunity that how during the pandemic time that other health hazards, other hazards can be equally brought into the preparedness and response planning of the countries and communities. And during this pandemic, over the last 18 months, there are other examples to deal with the concurrent emergency for which this classification is very important. There's earthquake in Croatia, Yas cyclone in Bangladesh, volcanic eruption in Democratic Republic of Congo, explosion in Beirut, floods in Indonesia are just a few to name with, in addition to the climate change impact. So now I would like to come here. In this sort of hazard classification context, as you know, that it's a multi-hazard risk assessment, are very important for prevention, mitigation, warnings, alerts, and early action, as well preparedness and response, not to mention recovery, because this actually contribute in the long-term planning. In this slide, I'm just sharing two guidance, which I think that it is a very important, that this guidance we have published, one for the Ministry of Health, and then the other one along with the UNDRF for all the disaster risk reduction focal points in the countries and also in the agencies. Why these are important? These are very important. The first one, that what we have heard also from the previous speakers, how we can bring people together, how health sector information can be aligned with other sectors, which is very important. So once the health sector report on the Sendai, so how they can report jointly and then together from the country level. And then also this guidance facilitates coordination between the sectors. It's the same with the other working paper that I'm sharing with you here. And then this is something to how to report COVID-19 specific risk and related information under Sendai Monitor. So that's the strength of the Sendai Monitor, and that's how the Sendai Disaster Risk Reduction Framework links to all of the sectors. We all know that biological hazard has been included in the global disaster risk reduction agenda already. So this is the work work we have started together with UNDRR, that how we can bring that at the country level also in the reporting and also in the actions. So it's important that the statistics are important, as you see, but statistics are not only the numbers. Each and every number in the statistics has a face. In health sector, it is more important for us. There are people behind each and every number that we use. These numbers are being used to save lives and reduce sufferings of people. This is where our collective responsibility is to make those numbers factual and authentic. I think this is why we are here to discuss with all of you that how we can make it authentic and then how we make it show that responsibility to make that data, which data help us in addressing all these challenges even in the health sector. I put together a list that the previous speakers have already mentioned many of them, that it is very important that when we say that official data or official statistics, what's the criteria of those official statistics and what would be the consideration? For in health sector, our consideration is gender disaggregation, age disaggregation. The consideration is to have more inclusive data, and then where we can identify the vulnerable and marginal communities, including refugee and migrants per population, and how this data are aligned to the humanitarian principle, and this how we can bring in climate and health data together to act together. And as I mentioned, validation by appropriate authority. So here actually I would like to conclude my presentation today to raise this question to all of you, because what I presented today, these are the just tip of the iceberg, what is required in health sector. So my question to all of you is that how much of these official statistics of health, emergency and disasters are on the radar of this esteemed forum, like the National Statistic Institution? And also I would like to highlight that this pandemic is a reminder of the intimate and delicate relationship between people and planet. How we all together can use the official disaster statistics to protect this interface, this delicate relationship. And then when we say official statistics, actually what is it? All the information we are using, are these official statistics or there is a need to do something more? Looking forward to hear from you. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Kutsia. Very interesting your presentation. Now I'm going to give the floor to Ms. Ruth Stutley, that she's going to do a presentation related to the UK COVID-19 infection survey, what ONS UK colleges have done and what they learn. Now I'm going to introduce her with her bio. Ruth Stutley joined ONS in June 2020, having worked in policy departments for a number of years in the UK. Ruth is a member of the UK Government Statistics Service and led a number of statistical teams across various sectors. Ruth has a number of years' experience leading multidisciplinary teams working in health statistics and research. Additionally, she has led various health policy and health regulatory roles. Ruth has a particular interest in producing statistics and intelligence to inform decision making. But Ruth is not alone. She came with Sarah Crofts. Sarah Croft has worked in the National Statistics since 2001 and leads the dissemination and outputs from the UK COVID infection survey. She has many years' experience of population statistics and recently had a crucial role leading the UN Teach Field City Group on aging. Sarah has led a range data collection and aspects of the New Zealand and UK censuses. Sarah is a member of the UK Government Statistics Service and has a particular interest in the communication of statistics. Welcome for both of you, and I give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to talk today. I have an apology up front. I'm afraid that Sarah isn't with me today, but it was great that you were able to share what wonderful people I work with. So this presentation is just very quickly about the UK statistical response to the coronavirus pandemic. Obviously, key overlaps are around the approach that we have taken, how we've used the data and how we've disseminated it. I should say up front, this is a snapshot of a longer presentation that was given to the World Data Forum about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So colleagues who were there then may, I'm afraid, will get the very shorter version today, but may recognise some of this. And I think Michael's in charge of my slides. Is that correct, Michael? So if we can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. As you would expect, when we became aware of the coronavirus pandemic, we wanted to make sure that we were able to effectively measure the rates of infection and how many people in time were developing antibodies to the virus. So this survey was very, very rapidly set up. The reason that ONS was able to set this up, so ONS is the Office for National Statistics, so the NSI within the UK, the reason that we set it up was because we had a significant skill set within the organisation and the right contacts to get a household survey of this sort of size set up in days, and it really was very, very rapid. The survey design, very briefly, is a household survey. Initially, our sample was drawn from previous survey respondents. Now, more recently, that's from our broader sampling frame. And it's a longitudinal survey. So households are selected and then individuals with, can we go back? Within the household individuals within the household are chosen to take part. And each week for about a month, people provide a swab, which we would be able to test to see if people were currently had the virus. And then for a smaller proportion of about 20%, we were taking bloods from people to understand if they had antibodies. Within the household, we swabbed everybody that was over 2. And for taking the antibody test via bloods, that was people over the age of 16. The survey has increased dramatically. Actually, that slide is slightly out of date. We've now conducted over 4 million tests, so it's very, very rapid. The reason we were able to set it up, as I say, was because of that skill set, but the partnerships, and I've given an indication in the graphic there of the breadth of partners that we work with, most crucially with Oxford University, who are joint study leads. And just one other very important point, which links to the previous presentation, is around the fact that actually, as the NSI doing this, we were independent of government, so it gave real kudos to the official aspect of our statistics. So if we move on to the next slide, I thought it would be worth just showing what our findings have shown. So we monitor our infection rates weekly, and we break that down by different groups. So we have the 4 countries within the United Kingdom where we have information. So for England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. We also have regions within those countries and some quite low level details of around about 500,000 people. And what we've found is that actually the data was absolutely critical in helping inform the key decision making within government. So on the next slide in a moment, you'll see the regional information that we have, but actually what we're able to show here, there's a graphic there which shows the peak around the new year, and actually this information was critical in that, and that just gives some of the headlines of some of the things that our data helped support the policy decisions that were being made. Ultimately, we were able to identify the growth of the different variants. So certainly back in the winter, we had the Alpha variant, or the variant that originated in the UK. We could identify that, and I'll come on to show you some of that in a moment. And that helped determine how the policy decisions that were being made. So if we go on to the next slide, there's just a couple of graphics here that will show that. So on the right-hand side, there's a breakdown of the percentage of people who were tested positive at that particular time. This is actually in real life, this is a moving graphic, and I think that shows it over the new year actually, and you will see that there was the peak down in the south east corner of England, where the variant was at its greatest at that point and around London, and you can see how it was spreading. And then on the right, those trend line on the left, sorry, those trend lines showing you the different rates. And at one point, I think it was nearly, it was over 3% of infection of people who were infected in London at one particular point. So quite very powerful survey that as we developed it and grew it, we were able to get quite a lot of granular detail. We obviously break it down by age and other aspects as well. So if we move on to the next slide, I mentioned just now around the importance of being able to understand what's going on. So again, this is from what we were seeing over Christmas, but this analysis allowed us to understand how the variant, the Alpha variant, was growing at Christmas time. So I think that's the red line, if I remember rightly on here. And so we were able to do that from the swabs we were taking, and we were showing that these were consistent with the genes that were flagging positive for the ORF1, AB and N genes. Once our swabs have been tested, they then go on for sequencing and confirmation. So it is about understanding that, but it was a really critical piece of analysis. If we go on to the next slide, it'll give you a little bit more of an example of how we've informed different testing strategies. So the benefit of having a randomly selected household survey to understand the prevalence of the virus in the UK has meant that we were able to pick up people who were testing positive but were not exhibiting symptoms. And what this information shows here, that they, at any one time there was about half the people who were testing positive were actually not reporting symptoms. So they might not have known that they were carrying COVID, and that would have had an impact on the spread had they gone about their business in a normal way. And this was a really critical, important set of data for policymakers, because actually, obviously everybody wants to do the right thing, but if you're not aware that you are positive, and that's important. And very often the routine testing strategies were for people who were declared at risk. The survey also goes on to show what sorts of symptoms people were showing. So we also measure that in quite a lot of detail, what they're reporting, whether it's issues around what's the word, sort of coughs and headaches and all sorts of things like that. So we do capture a lot of those things. We only do this on those tests which are strongly positive. So without going into too much detail, because I'm mindful of time, but our swabs are determined through a cycle threshold arrangement. And so where the cycle threshold is less than 30, this is where we capture those. So if we move on to the next slide, as I mentioned, the survey started off quite small. We did ramp it up quite considerably until about October last year, so that we now test about 150,000 people per fortnight. And we are now also increasing the antibody testing to around 150,000 per month and moving to a different sort of mechanic to get that. One of the benefits of this survey, and one of the things that we strongly try to do, is to adapt it really rapidly to the change in user needs. We're very mindful that the context around understanding what is happening around COVID is changing. And that's just one example. There's a little graphic there of the questionnaire, and we continually adapt that as well to ensure that whilst we remain consistent over time, we do reflect the user needs. So we try to add in questions around travel, work arrangements, etc. I'm very mindful of time. I've got one more slide. So if we can move on to the next slide, and I don't know if this will work, but I just wanted to very quickly talk about dissemination. Oh, good, it does. So this graphic here is a really important graphic, and we fondly refer to this as the nation's favourite graph, and it was at one point. So you can see that over time, the figures were changing over about so obviously this is ever so slightly out of date, but this is demonstrating the number of people, the percentage of people who are testing positive for antibodies, highly linked to our vaccination rollout. And what was quite interesting is you can see that this changes, and because we vaccinated people who were older to start with and work down, you can see it as that changes across the time. With our official statistics, of course, you would expect us to also include uncertainty, and that's what those error bars there. But I think it's a really critical aspect, which I'll round up on to talk about dissemination. So we're very lucky to have a fabulous survey with fantastically amazing people who work on it in the team and in partnership. But none of that would be worth it if we didn't have an effective dissemination strategy as well. It's really important we understand who our users are and what they need. And I suppose the way that we think of this very, very simply is that we have a number of user profiles. So we have the interested citizen, the person who was part of society, who's very interested in what is happening and want to be reassured with what is happening with the virus. Then we have government decision makers who will have particular needs and demands, and it's really important that we are also able to support them in a transparent way. So trying to make sure that both of those users understand the information that we are providing. And then finally, and helpfully, we also have an expert group of users. So those real detailed epidemiologists, virologists, academics, etc., who are really keen on the detail of our language. And so we do have a strategy to try to ensure that all the information that we provide is accessible by those three different types of users and their specific needs. And just to my final line before I wrap up, that photograph there is of our Secretary of State and Jonathan Van Tam on the left-hand side, and they were using this graph to demonstrate to the public actually how the antibodies were being, how the growth in antibodies was a positive thing. And I'll leave it there because I'm very mindful of the time I'm allowed. But thank you very much. I really look forward to having some questions, and hopefully that has been a useful snapshot of what we've done in the UK.
Thank you, Ruth. Of course, it's a very important tool, and the way you have managed has been incredible. So congratulations for those that work, and we're amazed with this dynamic graphic at the end. So great, thanks. I'm now going to introduce a national example of Canada that it's going Ivan Clermont going to present. Mr. Ivan Clermont is Director General of the Analytical Studies branch at Statistics Canada. In this position, he is responsible for leading several teams of researchers that provides authoritative expertise and which produce high quality, relevant and timely information on economic, health and social issues important to Canadians, governments, non-profit organizations and institutions. Mr. Ivan, welcome, and please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Good morning, good day, good afternoon, and good day, everyone. So I wonder if you can see my screen right now, and I'd like to know how we're faring with time, because if you need to speed this up, I can certainly pass more rapidly on certain passages.
Oh, I will appreciate that. We can see your screen, and we have 5 minutes to go with the agenda. But of course, if you need you had 50 minutes. So in case you need to wrap up 10 minutes, I will appreciate very much. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Alda. Thank you very much. First, let me thank the organizing committee for inviting us at this first expert forum for producers and users of disaster-related statistics to share with you a very brief overview of Statistics Canada experience during the COVID-19 pandemic. To that effect, I would like to recognize the tremendous efforts of all the individuals and teams who were involved in this huge endeavor, some of whom are listening in today on this call. So maybe what I'd like to start with is at the base of almost everything we do, especially in time of crisis, we need to stick to principles to guide our work and decide about engaging in activities, especially when there's some emergency at stake. And at first, in trying to be relevant, it was necessary to make sure that we were timely. And timeliness here came as the first element of quality over precision. We needed to make sure that speed trumped perfection, and that is an attitude we took for providing information for helping the management of this crisis. We also wanted to make sure that we would leverage at a maximum possible all the recent developments in modern methods in place, such as AI, ML, nowcasting methods, modeling, projections, and crowdsourcing, and making use of panel web survey to be as much quick as possible and to be as much relevant as possible. Of course, we needed to act within our current legislative framework and be mindful of proportionality and ethics when engaging in a new sort of activities. So here's an example of two sets of activities we engaged in. There is what I would qualify as enhancing activities within our normal mandate, which is what you find on the left side. For example, adjust what we normally do to be more responsive and timely in providing relevant information for decision making. That consisted in a nutshell in providing social, health, and economic impact new analytical products using modeling of all sorts, supply use tables, for example, to estimate GDP and job losses when shutting down a whole sector. It also consisted in tracking down the recovery and measuring the resulting structural changes. That alone could be a full topic for a whole seminar. And also, it consisted in putting together a new survey vehicle and adjusting current ones that are existing to make sure they were more granular and more relevant. So we put a lot of effort in making use of flash estimates and nowcasting methods to provide timelier measure of economic aggregates, such as GDP, retail trade, and other key economic indicators. And a lot of work was put into launching our new Statistical Geospatial Explorer, which I'm sure most NSO have a very good example already in place. So these are not the activities I would like to focus on today here. We're more interested in discussing how we help others fulfill their mandate, which falls outside of our mandate. And this is what I would refer to providing data and statistical services to frontline agencies, helping them in their mandate. And some example of these are shown on the right side of this slide here. So, of course, we did a lot of things, and this is just a glimpse of what we did, but we put together a project consisting of monitoring personal protective equipment supply chain, We also developed some mapping tools, custom mapping tools for frontline agencies that are not public. We built pressure indicator looking at how the health system is being overloaded, and also we built some indices of restriction index. We built a vaccine forecasting dashboard to help projecting vaccination rates at different geography level and population groups given various scenarios of vaccine procurement. And so we are these days paying some attention to rapid test procurement and helping frontline agencies thinking about identifying hotspots where those could be used with more impact. So I would say we also provided and still provide ongoing modeling and surveillance support and consulting services to public health agency in the area of epidemiological modeling as well. So the involvement are wide, but what we're going to do here is we're going to go in the next few slides and provide you with a very brief glimpse of these specifically, but I'm more interested in having the conversation about how, and as an NSO, we should be engaging more efficiently in these types of activities. For example, as COVID-19 transformed our mandate, and how, and will that be permanent? So if you look on the next slide here, what I would like to say here is a few weeks into the pandemic, in collaboration with several partners, we established a repository to help manage the nation's personal protective equipment inventories. Our contribution to this project has provided real-time data and modeling to government decision makers to inform purchasing and manage ongoing supply of this important equipment. And the situation in Canada in the beginning is that there was absolutely no domestic production of most of these. So this was highly critical that we had a system in place to manage these things. So the question that we set out to answer is, how much PPE do we need in Canada, and will we have enough? So while other government departments were busy purchasing, warehousing, and distributing PPE across the country, we set out to determine how much PPE was needed, not only now, but throughout the pandemic and into the inter-pandemic periods. So you can see example here of these type of commodities. We're referring to respirators, surgical masks, gloves, gowns, and other important commodities. So the end product of this work is a PPE data hub that is refreshed weekly. It used to be daily in the beginning, in a central location where users from the federal government, as well as all the provinces and territories, can see current procurement and deployment tracking information by PPE commodity and demand, and making even projections 12 months into the future. So on this slide here, while we have a survey that weekly put together to inform the demand estimates for PPE commodities in the private sector. The epidemiology of COVID-19 is a key driver of consumption for certain PPE items in the public health sector. That's the case of N95 respirators, gowns, and surgical masks, and specifically ventilators that are very expensive. Those are all driven by epi curves. So near real-time data is gathered and is netted against the demand projection to identify supply shortage and generate purchase requirements over the next 2 months in over 60 sectors of the economy. So beyond PPE, we also helped our partners with many other COVID-related work here. You have an example, the Public Health Agency of Canada brought in the Canadian Armed Forces to manage the vaccine logistic and rollout. So, but they approached us to help interpret the data they had and that they were generating, and to help them forecast supply and demand for vaccines into the future. So this led to the development of a COVID vaccine forecasting dashboard. It's a central hub where users from the government can see upcoming vaccine supply by manufacturers alongside the capacity that each jurisdiction has to administer vaccines and the demand for vaccines. So here's a look at some of these milestones that are refreshed weekly in this dashboard. So in this view, for example, you can see the date for which we expect different populations to reach 75% vaccinated rate for first and second doses, for example. We also offered our expertise on data and insight to support the government communications to enhance their reach, particularly in COVID-19 hotspots by creating customized mapping tools. So you can see an example here of mapping tool, which allows user to identify hotspots area and to overlay that with census data and drill down for these same area at the neighborhood level to obtain information on characteristics of these population in these areas. Similar maps are also available for age distribution, language, income, and immigrants, just to name a few variables. So there was a reason why we were brought to play such a role, I think, and we are known to present some advantage to our partners that could be leveraged to help address this crisis. I think our expertise in data integration, modeling, analysis, and data stewardship was seen as being very handy here. Providing stewardship services beyond our mandate, we also felt that we could make a difference. I think there was the civic duty of the organization to help and be relevant by doing such. So there are here a number of reasons why we think we were brought to help him. And lastly, what I would like to bring here, but it's by providing these stewardship services beyond our regular mandate may present some risk and advantages as well going forward. Here are a few questions that I think many have posed themselves during the process in our organization and maybe in your organization as well. Is our involvement as a NSO in supporting surveillance work, producing near-time information for tactical purpose, and providing a lesser level of precision in our estimates, maybe less quality projections, does that pose a threat to the trust the public has in the NSOs? That's, I think, an important question as well. Are we well resourced to continue this role without impacting our regular program? What do we expect from us in the future? What are the emerging partnership models that are pointing out? So those are questions I think NSO may have at the moment in helping out manage the pandemic. I'm sure there are many others, but I will risk a few answers during the panel session later on at the end of the session on some aspects of these. And I'd be glad to answer any questions people may have on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ivan, very much for your presentation. It was very interesting knowing more about what you have doing in Canada. Thank you very much. Now, I would like to see if Michael, has any message in the chat, because in the public one, I don't see any question for this session in particular. Okay.
I don't see any specific questions there. There were some comments, but I think they're not really questions directed to the presentations. And I think we can then also use the panel discussion later on to take up a few questions.
That is great. Well, I have a question here. Were there any GDPR issues in the ONS or statistics in Canada? I think that Ivan might answer this, please, quickly. It's from Jerry Brady.
Excuse me, Alda, could you repeat that question, please?
Yes. Were there any GDPR issues in the ONS or Statistics Canada?
GDP, if I understand well the question, I think this was one. Yes, there were, as everywhere else, I think. And it was important to us to understand how several sectors of the economy was impacted. That's why we made use of supply use table and did simulations on what would be the impact, for example, to shut down the tourism sector in certain provinces. One other big area which was highly impacted, and it started before the pandemic, it was the oil sector. We have two provinces in the country which are very much dependent on that industry, Alberta and Saskatchewan. Are big producers of oil, and they were highly impacted because there was an increase in the supply of oil prior to the pandemic, and then a decrease in the demand following the beginning of the pandemic for this. So that created the reduction in prices, and the whole sector almost collapsed. And yes, we made a lot of use of supply use table to measure these impacts. And also GDP, yes, we created some flash estimates because, as everybody knows, those official statistics are not always the most timely. So we had to rely more on modeling expertise to provide some indications of how the economy was faring and being impacted.
Thank you very much, Ivan. We have a comment from the same person, but we have to move on because we are 10 minutes over. I would like to thank you, all of the panelists of this segment. Thank you very much for all your inputs. It was very interesting to knowing more of your work. Now I'm introducing the next segment, which is Managing Climate Change Related Hazard with Official Statistics. And I'm introducing Mr. James Doris, Jim. Since 2005, he's a project officer with the World Meteorological Organization Disaster Risk Reduction and Public Services Branch. Before working at the WMO, he served in the US Navy for 4 years, 2 of which were at sea on an aircraft carrier. More recently, he held position as a financial controller at Credit Suisse Bank, staff methodology at a private weather company in the United States, and served as a meteorological, I'm sorry, it's hard, this word for me, station chief in the United States Air National Guard. Mr. Doris has a business and finance degree from the European University and is a trained and certified meteorologist. He has significantly contributed to the development of several publications, including the Atlas of Mortality and Economic Losses from Weather, Climate, and Weather Extremes, and other important reports on early warning systems and emergency preparedness. Welcome, thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me okay?
Very well, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. I'll share my screen right now. So does everybody see the?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, wonderful. Let me
Thank you.
Move the screen. I get 2 screens, so it's going in 2 different directions. So thank you very much. I'm very excited to speak with you about the WMO project, but also to relay some of the critical areas where we think we can help in national statistics offices, as well as disaster managers and loss and damage stakeholders. What is the WMO? WMO is an organization made up of 193 members. It existed all the way back into the 1870s, and its first fundamental objective was to, and still is observations. Observation of temperature, wind, clouds, etc. And this is something that I think that leads us to the current paradigm, in a sense, when we're talking about statistics and having hazard-related statistics. And this is what I'll get into, the WMO cataloging of hazardous events initiative. So what is the initiative? It is a service that will benefit countries at their national loss and damage stakeholders, such as disaster management authorities, providing hazard event information that is scalable, granular, and usable and authoritative. why are we doing this and how are we doing this? So WMO, through its normal observations, we have all 193 countries provide observations on an hourly, half-hourly basis, and more. All this data is being in the background. We don't know that because when you go on your phone, you see a temperature. Normally that data comes from your National Meteorological and Hydrological Service, and that is all computed. If you go to London or to Jakarta, you get instantaneous temperatures and information. This all comes from our network of National Meteorological and Hydrological Services. And what we are going to do is change, or not change, but to augment this observation capacity with the ability to observe hazards. And I'll explain that further later. What are the challenges that we see that brought us to change or to add to our observations? In many cases, attribution in context of recorded losses is not accurately associated with the correct causal hazard or linked to the larger physical system. How does that mean? I get two examples. 1 second. Okay. Typhoon Haiyan. Many of you know that it was a very destructive typhoon. It impacted many of the islands in the Pacific, including the Philippines and also Vietnam and Laos, etc. Many deaths and damage were attributed to Haiyan, which consisted of winds, of course, heavy rains, coastal surges, storm surge, etc. How are the losses and damages attributed to each causal hazard? If you look at the databases, at the larger databases for loss and damage, you'll find that they're attributed to Haiyan, but very few databases, in fact, practically none, state that it was, for instance, the storm surge that caused so many deaths, and that is attributed to Haiyan. That resolution of data is what we're trying to get at and provide to the users, which are the stakeholders in disaster risk reduction, and of course the NSOs. Sorry. El Nino. This is a climate type of effect where we have impacts that are seen across the world. And how do we measure that up? How do we actually attribute things in the databases that, oh, these floods here in Colombia, or this drought, for instance, in Europe, was caused or enhanced by climate change or by El Nino. So these things we want to capture within this database. One more. This leads me on to how do you attribute in as far as climate change. I won't read all of this. This will be there for you to read at your leisure. But one of the things I wanted to bring out is, while there are very few studies that have found any human signal in small scale and severe weather events, such as thunderstorms and tornado, there has been progress in attributing individual extreme events that occur over a larger scale. So what it's saying is that for climate and climate change, we're having increased skill or abilities to be able to see the larger systems and how much climate change apply to those. But for the smaller scale, we're still working on trying to develop that capability through the process, the methodologies that have been put into place. Of course, there's a lot of interest in attribution of events relatively soon after the event. And this is something they're working through to do through already established methods. The example here, as far as the heat wave in Japan, would have been impossible without a human influence. Now, this is a part, some of the chapter that we have in the forthcoming Atlas of Mortality and Economic Losses that will be coming out this month. So if you wish to learn more about how climate change is attributed to actual weather event, weather, hydro, and other events, please look at that particular publication. What are the goals of the WMO initiative? And that is to strengthen members' capabilities to record weather, climate, and water and space weather events in a systematic way for use in forensic meteorology, liability claims, research, and many other disciplines. It's also a way of WMO contributing to the monitoring of the global agenda through empirical science-based approach. And it is also strengthening members, meaning countries, disaster management capabilities and multi-hazard early warning systems through improved risk-based information and strengthening WMO's leadership in the hydrometeorological and climate-related hazards. And this goes to the events aspects. So what is the standard? WMO adopted this methodology for cataloging in 2019. The methodology ensures uniqueness of each event record. It has an events list, which is very important, which I'll get to in a minute. It's scalable, meaning it's you can see from the disaggregated data all the way up to the larger scale systems like hurricanes or El Nino. It's flexible. It provides the flexibility for addressing regional and national specificities. This is just a short, small graphic of the methodology here. The event record. It has a randomized event identifier, 32 character, that is used in the IT sphere. It's a standard to use by ITU. And then you have, if you look down here, you have your event type and your spatial area. The event type is the hazard, and the spatial area is georeferenced information. The WMO Events List. It's an initial list that we started in 2019. It consists of 37 different hazard event types, which losses and damages are potentially associated. It's an authoritative list, meaning that this list goes through the WMO constituent body process for adoption, meaning all 193 countries have input into it and vote to adopt this list. It is not intended to be hierarchical. Hierarchies should be developed or codified during the post-event analysis based on the actual linkages between and among hazards that cause losses. This is where WMO, the science-based initiative, in the sense that we will look at the causality. The storm surge was affiliated with Typhoon Haiyan, for instance, or the El Nino, and being able to link these particular items together within the database so that any data that comes to those particular items or those particular hazards is automatically linked to the higher order system. Synergies, this also synergizes with the UNDR ISC hazard definition and classification review. It's a very important publication because it really sets the ball moving for countries to start really looking at hazard names and their definitions as a tool for standardizing data and statistics that come afterward. So it's a very important publication. That's why WMO Events List will go from its current 37 to the 66 that are under the WMO mandate. These are the 37 events list, or the hazards. This is an example of the event UUID, a string of 32 characters for the event ID. And then you have that associated with a tropical cyclone. And then, of course, at the national level, you will have event IDs for each one of these, for storm surge, flooding, etc. And these are linked to the higher order system, or the tropical cyclone. This is an easy, yes, sir. Please.
Dear Jim, sorry to interrupt. Would you please round up in 1 more minute? I will appreciate it very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
So in implementing this, one of the key things, as you see in this map, you have the national, regional, global. One of the key aspects of this is coordination of national event records across the country, working with other agencies to be able to combine records and be able to make the proper linkages and bring in the added value of loss and damage. This is an example of layering of information. I won't get into the specific information on this, but that it will produce higher quality impact-based forecasts and research into the historical relation between and among hazards. Of course, I've stated that it is tracking public policy indicators. It's also application in risk management, and specifically research is very important. We have 2 pilots. One is in Asia and South Pacific, and this has been running since 2019, and we have brought the past data from 2018 into this, which did not take too much time to bring this information in. Indonesia, the Indonesian Hydromet Service was key in this, as well as Australia. Yes. Then we have the European example, where the Kroner database and our Region Climate Center is building a database whereby it is using the methodology and is able to map this information in time and space. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James, very much for your presentation. It was very interesting to knowing more your work. There's some question in the chat, and I appreciate that our colleagues have been answered them. And James, please, if you answer this last question that also appears, so I can move on with the program, I will appreciate very much. Thank you. And now I'm going to present the next presentation. It's a national example from Suriname. We have Anjali Abreu Kisoining from the General Bureau of Statistics. Anjali is a statistician working at the General Bureau of Statistics since 2008, with a master's degree in research methods and a bachelor's degree in international economy, with experience in the field of data collection and compilation environment statistics, including climate change indicators and statistics and the SDGs. I think that we have the presentation or not. Please, Estela, would you please share the presentation from Anjali? Thank you very much. Anjali, welcome, and go ahead. You have the floor, please, in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good night. My name is, can you guys hear me?
Very much, very clear.
Okay. Yes, so today I will talk about the experience Suriname has regarding the climate disaster-related indicators. So I'm going to talk about our experience, our challenges, our advantages, and the way forward. Next slide, please. Next, yeah. The experience we have with climate change indicators. In 2017, Suriname was introduced to the first set of the UNSD draft climate change indicators at the 4th expert group meeting of the environment statistics. Suriname also contributed to the revision of the UNSD draft global set of climate change statistics and indicators, and is also participating in the global consultation of the draft global set that was sent to the NSOs to be completed by the end of July. This set also contains several indicators and statistics related to disasters. Although the 2008 data that we have for greenhouse gases is very outdated, we are now busy preparing our third national communication, where the GBS had already provided data to the local consultant. Next slide. So this is just to show you guys, in the global climate change framework, you have disaster-related indicators. As you can see, frequency of hazardous events and direct economic loss, etc. I'm not going to go through all of this, but this is to give you an idea how important disaster data is for the climate change framework. Next slide, please. Suriname's data on precipitation and temperature. Our climate is tropical, and we have a lot of rainfall and more or less uniform temperature and a high humidity. We have 2 wet and 2 dry seasons, and the most rain we get comes from the rain seasons and from the intertropical convergence zone, the ITC set. We have the months have the lowest amount of precipitation are September and October, and the highest amount are May. And the average temperatures in Suriname are between 21 degrees and 24 degrees, and around noon between 31 and 34 degrees. Next slide, please. This is just to show you an idea of the data that the GBS collected from the meteorology services on precipitation and temperature. Next slide. Our weather events. Although Suriname lies completely outside the hurricane zone, the aftermath of the hurricanes that proliferate in the Caribbean are often experienced in the form of heavy rainfall. Suriname does have disasters, but until now they have remained relatively limited without large numbers of casualties. These include the 2004 drought in our interior, where villages could no longer be reached via the river and had to get food aid. We had the floods of 2006 and 2008 in the interior and in the coastal plain. The coastal plain in Suriname is very vulnerable for sea level rise. Paramaribo is approximately between 0 and 3 meters above sea level, and is on the list of vulnerable countries with low-lying coastal plains. So we will get affected by climate change. Next slide, please. This is also data that was collected by the GBS. Population in Suriname affected by a disaster due to extreme weather. So this is mostly heavy rains and tropical storms. I use the SDG indicator. This is one of the SDG indicators where you have to sum up the injured and then divide it by the estimated population. So this is the data that we have collected. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. Managing climate change related hazard. No, sorry, the slide before. Yeah. Managing climate change related hazards with official statistics. So, Suriname does not have any specialized surveys. So, the only official data that we provide is official population data from the census, meteor estimates, also data from the Central Registry Office. And the data that the National Disaster Relief Agencies want from us is population by location, age, and sex. And also the fire department, this is the official data they get from us. The data on population and dwellings, we also have that data and can be found in our environment statistics publication in chapter 1 that we collect every 2 years. And for other information regarding the districts, official information from the district commissioners is used. So the data that the GBS can provide are these official data. The challenges, of course, since March 2020, COVID-19. Compared to the other countries, because I listened to lots of the presenters, the NSOs that are very in the small island countries or in countries like Suriname, we only have 500,000 people. We have lack of human and financial resources, which make it very hard for us to do specialized surveys to collect data on disasters. For data on disasters, the data that we do have, we rely heavily on administrative data. from the National Relief Center, the fire department, or the meteorological service. So it's not data that comes from us, it's administrative data. A big challenge we also have is the lack of knowledge of how to collect and compile data regarding disaster-related indicators from these data sources. Of course, the NSO, we get a lot of training in how to collect the indicators, what is the indicator, and all the metadata in the disaster-related indicators. But when you rely on others, they will provide to you what they have. They don't always give us the data the way we want it, and that is one of our big data gaps. So when training is provided, we should not only train the NSO staff, but also staff from the meteorological service, the fire departments, everybody who's responsible for when there is a disaster, because that part is missing. Because of the dependence on administrative data and the lack of metadata, we don't know how very good the data quality is. And you also have a lot of data gaps because for us as an NSO, we know data by gender is important, data by location, by age, this aggregation is very important. But they, in the case of Suriname, they only compile the total data. So if we ask them data, they will only give us what they have. So we need to work on better communication and more training on both sides. Next slide, please. But there are also advantages and opportunities. There's a very good collaboration between the NSO and the environment stakeholders, the meteorological service and the NCCR. Every 2 years, the GBS publishes their environment statistics publication, where in chapter 2, there is data on climate and natural disasters. I put the link here for anybody who wants to download it. When the GBS asks data, the NCCR and the meteorology service, they provide us when requested. So that's good. And also the UNDP in Suriname, they have various projects for there's funding available on projects for environment and climate change. So if we wanted a project, we could always rely on the UNDP. Next slide, please. And the way forward for Suriname, of course, we will try to collect more disaster data for our next environment statistics publication that is planned next year. We are also planning to publish a climate change statistics report, our first report that will contain data on disasters in the chapter about drivers. Keep participating in national, regional, and international trainings like this one, and also continue to contribute to the expert group on environment statistics. And hopefully when funding is available, the GBS can consider developing specialized surveys to measure impact of disasters. Next slide. I think this is that. Thank you very much. And I wish everybody success. Thank you.
Thank you, Anjali, very much for your presentation. Very interesting and good work that you have been doing in Suriname. Now I want to present to Carole Chouchani Cherfan from ESCWA. She's going to do for us a presentation related to our BAP region official statistic in the preparation of the vulnerability assessment under the Regional Initiative for the Assessment of Climate Change Impacts on Water Resources and Socioeconomic Vulnerability in the ARBAP region. Carol Chouchani Cherfan is Chief of Water Resources in the Climate Change and Natural Resource Sustainability Cluster at the ESCWA in Beirut. And she also coordinates the Regional Initiative for the Assessment of Climate Change Impacts on Water Resources and Socioeconomic Vulnerability in the ARBAP region, which is implemented with regional and global partners under the auspices of the ARBAP Ministerial Water Council through the ARBAP Center of Climate Change Policies based at ESCWA. Her work focuses on implemented regional initiatives, focuses on climate change assessment and mainstreaming, integrated water resources management, and the Sustainable Development Goals Prior to joining the United Nations, she worked for the Harvard Institute for International Development and the World Bank. She holds a degree from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy and Georgetown University. Welcome. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alda, and greetings from Beirut, Lebanon, everyone from around the world. We're very pleased to provide with you a regional perspective to complement what my colleagues have been sharing with you before, and to share what the Arab region is doing to advance understanding of climate change, disaster risk reduction, and adaptation in that regard. So I'm going to be sharing with you experiences over the last decade implementing the regional initiative for the assessment of climate change impacts on water resources, because we are very water scarce countries, and what that means for socioeconomic vulnerability. And we've been doing this regionally because, quite frankly, the Arab region is not a traditional geographic region used globally. It's a geopolitical region. So we needed something to identify commonalities and issues of concern to Morocco, all the way to Oman and Iraq, all the way down to Somalia and even southward. So the objective really was to have a regional assessment to inform intergovernmental cooperation through an evidence-based approach and provide dialogue and information to support assessment, DRR, disaster risk reduction, adaptation, mitigation, and of course the negotiations going on climate and Sendai. We do not do this alone at ESQA. While we are the host of the Arab Center for Climate Change Policies, we work with over a dozen partners on climate change analysis, and a lot of our climate modeling work is actually done with the Swedish Met and Hydro Institute up in Sweden. And thanks again to all our partners. I was pleased to see my colleague from the WMO earlier today, and we work very closely with their offices in the region and at headquarters. So what do we do now at in RICAR? Well, we have a regional knowledge hub, but what we have done is create an assessment that's rather unique. We don't only look at the biophysical impacts of climate, but we also look at what it means for socioeconomic vulnerability. And we've created an integrated assessment that links both parts of those types of analysis to have an integrated approach to understanding vulnerability hotspots and building capacity of regions to that end. And we do that by using regional climate models, which are nested in global climate models. We include hydrological modeling assessments, and then we use that to inform an integrated vulnerability assessment. So I don't want to dwell into a lot of science, but I think it was James who just mentioned the idea of these variables that exist. Well, indeed, when we do climate modeling, we take the observed data that exists, and then we use that to complete data sets at a geographic, geospatial scale in order to complete data gaps and then project in the future. Because in the end, we want to observe for disaster statistics, but to do disaster risk reduction, we also have to plan ahead. So we take through these blocks at the various levels in the atmosphere, on the land, and the sea, and we look at this through various variables. And these are observed variables that are collected and identified even through WMO processes. And these essential climate variables can indeed be used to inform official statistics, and they are used already to inform global databases. And then what we do, we take what the parameters are at these various grid boxes, think about 3D grid boxes across the globe and for us across the Arab region, and use that to inform regional climate models, hydrological models. For the purpose of this discussion, I think probably what is most interesting is how we use it to identify extreme climate indices. And indeed, let me explain how important that is, because when we think of average temperatures temperatures are often presented at the national scale in terms of a mean. So across a year or across a month or even across a day. But what's important is when you are thinking about extreme climate events, you really have to look at the peaks, the highs and the lows. So sometimes when we're looking at the climate analysis in a disaster context, we really have to think not only about this average, but what it means for extreme climate phenomenon. And that is representative by various indices that exist globally, but also can be created to adapt to local and regional needs. For example, statistics or indices generated for the number of summer days or the number of hot days globally usually talks about the number of hot days that exceed 25 degrees Celsius or 35 degrees Celsius. 35 degrees Celsius in the Middle East is winter. I mean, it's almost at that point right now. So we have created actually other indices that are more relevant, that can collect the observed data and collect and also organize data that is projected into the future to get a better understanding about disaster trends and indices that can affect the way we pursue policy. And the same thing, rather than looking at only temperature, it might be interesting to look at the number of days that are dry without precipitation, or the amount of precipitation that falls. And these are different ways for us to understand and catalog information. For example, this map looks very much different from the temperature map, right? The number of days, the duration of dry spell, it gives you a different understanding of what risks might be for potential droughts, for example, when complemented with other types of indicators that exist. I'm going to go fast over this since we're limiting on time. So how does this relate to the vulnerability assessments as mentioned in the title of the presentation? We've been working on integrated vulnerability assessments across a variety of sectors, and these were chosen through an intergovernmental process looking at water-dependent sectors. How did we do this? We took the observed data and the modeling data coming out of the regional climate models, hydrological models, to qualify what exposure is. But then we use national statistics and other sources of official statistics to better understand what that means for vulnerability. Because in the end, it's not only the impact. If there is an impact in Lebanon, where I sit right now, and an impact in the UAE, just the difference in GDP means your ability to respond to those different disaster events is distinct from one another. So we have to think of a context beyond just the exposure to a disaster, but your ability to respond. And that is why we have a methodology that thinks about, and taken from the IPCC, about exposure and sensitivity, generating potential impact, linking that to adaptive capacity, and then generating vulnerability. And to be quick, we do this through a variety of indicators. Again, the modeling outputs that have come out of the work on the biophysical side. And then we identify through a collaborative process and an assessment, so ensure that indicators do not influence each other adversely. We identify the indicators that are most relevant for the sector, both in terms of sensitivity and also what that means for adaptive capacity when it deals with access to knowledge or technology or GDP capacity or infrastructure. And let me show you how different that is when we look at the maps very quickly. So we take those indicators, we weight them, we classify them, we put them on a geospatial platform, and then we calculate the various vulnerability indicators. So this, for example, and I'm wrapping up, I promise I'll do it in just in a minute. This, for example, is exposure. So this is what someone might normally think about that. Sensitivity has a different view in terms of, much less of effect. Then if you think of potential impacts, you have another view, depending on your analysis. And adaptive capacity shows a completely different story. And that's how important official statistics are to help inform that adaptive capacity, because it gives you a different story from just what is observed. And then you get a composite that talks about what the vulnerability is for the region. So this type of analysis is available in different formats. We have a regional knowledge hub. We do this at the country level. We do that at the basin level. We do this at specific sectors. It's available on our regional knowledge platform. All the data fully openly available, and we provide technical assistance to how to access it. We also have a data hub that is hosted jointly with FAO, where you can access the data yourself. And I just wanted to do a shout out for our colleagues at UNDRR, where also under RCAR, we don't only do this modeling work, but also work on disaster loss inventories. So thank you very much, and happy to respond to any questions there might be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Thank you very much for all the panelists that we had in this segment. Actually, let me see if we have only one comment. I will appreciate very much, Carol, if you please answer by chat, as James has helped me and Ivan and others, so we can move on with the agenda. We have now the panel discussion, and there are several topics to talk about it. So I will appreciate very much your help with this. And I going to move forward to the next session, which is the panel discussion with the Professor Virginia Moray. I leave you in a very good hands, and please, Virginia, you have the floor for you. Thank you very much.
Alda, what a fantastic series of presentations. Gosh, have I loved that. It's been just tremendous. Thank you so much.
It's been delightful.
Oh,
I mean, we have
wow,
95 participants. It's because of the interesting. So congratulations to all the panelists that we had. We have very nice today presentations. Thank you, Virginia.
I think just amazing. So can I invite Kutsia, I see you on. Thank you so much for joining the panel. James, Jim, you're there. Ruth, can you possibly turn your video on? No, Ruth, you're not there. Ruth.
Yep, I'm here.
There you are. Okay. And then Ivan, thank you very much for the Canadian presentation. Gosh, that was really interesting. Do you know, I never expected you to look at personal protective equipment for COVID. That really surprised me. Sorry, little sidetrack in there. And Anjali, your lovely presentation from Suriname and the work you've been doing there. It'd be wonderful if we turn on your video, please, too. Anjali, are you there?
Yeah, there might be some internet problems with Suriname, so maybe it's better she has her video off.
Video.
Just to listen to Anjali.
Okay, Anjali, at least I know you're there, which is wonderful. And thank you for your great presentation. So the person that is new to us all is Adam Smith. Adam, are you there?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, goody goody. I'd know those dulcet tones anywhere. I've had great pleasure in working with Adam before, and it's lovely to know you're there, even if we can't see you. Is it too early in the morning again? Have you not had your breakfast yet?
No, my video is on, I believe.
We can see him,
all right,
Virginia. So maybe
I shouldn't be teasing him, should I? I just think we need to make this a really jolly panel because, frankly, the presentations have been just stunning and so exciting. Oh, there you are, Adam. Good. Yes, perfect. So let me just introduce, I know that we've had incredible introductions to my very good friend Kutsia, because I come from the health domain, and have Kutsia present as the head of disaster risk management and resilience unit at the health emergency program of the World Health Organization at a time of COVID is so spoiling for us all. But the presentation, I thought, Kutsia, was just so inspiring. I really congratulate you. Jim, it was great to have you from WMO contributing both this morning and this afternoon. And the work you're proposing is really extraordinary. And knowing that you're leading on the disaster risk reduction and public services branch is really key. Ruth, it's lovely to meet you. I've never met you before from the Office of National Statistics in the UK, but there's always a first time, so thank you very much. It's very interesting to hear you present on one particular project, considering that I sit inside Public Health England and we've been working across the whole country doing a lot of this work as well, and then using your data when it's come in, so it's been really helpful. So Ivan, it was wonderful to hear the work that you've been doing as Director General of the Analytical Studies Branch in Statistics Canada. I've always found the Canadian work to be inspiring. I've worked very closely with Public Health Canada before, and your Climate Canada. So you've done some amazing things there. So it's going to be lovely to have you contribute to this panel. And Anjali, I won't ask you to appear, but I've been told off by Michael already. But to hear in depth how you in Suriname make things work, knowing that your resources are slim, I think it's really inspiring. So let's turn to my good friend Adam. Let me introduce him. Adam comes from NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration of the United States of America. Adam is an applied climatologist, and he's been a leading expert on the US research to quantify weather extremes and climate disaster costs across society, government, and industry sectors, something that I have been really interested in when we've been working with you, because Adam has been contributing to this huge hazards classification work as well, along with Jim and many others. I know your research is trying to seek to homogenize and transition disparate disaster data sources with better quality controlled disaster cost frameworks as research tools. I think something that we'll need you to explain. And what I really love, which you share with me at the beginning of every year, is NOAA's US $1 billion weather and climate disasters. which you report at the beginning of the year, and that's quite shocking. Can you pop in a link into the web into the chat so others can see it? I think the work you've been doing on that is really interesting. And then, of course, you're involved in a lot of the UN, DRR, and WMO frameworks, which is just tremendous. So the panel is really trying to see how we can take a lot of this work forward and trying to deliver things that you want to share with your expertise, but most importantly, it requires a huge engagement from the audience. I want lots of chat, guys. I want lots of things firing to and fro. And I want you really to engage, to tell us what you think about where we go to in the future. And this would be just so exciting if we can deliver this a bit more. So please really use the chat function. And I have Kanza. Kanza, can you just appear on the screen for a second? Are you there, Kanza? So Kanza Ahmed works with me in public. There's Kanza. Hello, Kanza. So Kanza works with me in Public Health England, and she is somebody who's trying to drive forward some of the ideas for pilots with Michael. So I really wanted to introduce you to my lovely colleague, Kanza Ahmed, who is a proper epidemiologist and statistician. Woohoo! Really safe pair of hands in this crazy world. So really important that you get to see her, and she's going to try and pull together for us all a slide of the key points from this session. So Kanza, over to you to pull that slide together, and I'm sure you'll want to chip in later. So anybody who puts up their hands, please know that we really want you engaged.
Thank you very much, Virginia.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to take you on to what we really would like you to think about discussing. So we have a whole series of questions we thought we would try and start with, but first of all, we're going to get Adam just to say what you really do and why does it work.
Hi, good day, everyone. So what we all do collectively is not easy because of lack of data standards across space and time, by hazard, by subhazard, by organization. And quickly, I would say that to capture direct losses, indirect losses, mortality, morbidity, it requires a broad array of public and private sector data partners. And I think the private sector is a key piece also that we need to think about. So in the United States, we have partnerships with the private insurance and reinsurance world, but also our federal scientific agencies like FEMA, NASA, USAID, USDA, the Interagency Fire Center, really about 12 different partners. And each partner provides a different hazard or subhazard that goes into this large matrix of analysis. And there are also about 12 to 15 different variables we try to analyze over space and time. Since 1980, the United States has been impacted by 291 separate billion-dollar weather or climate-related disaster events. And both the frequency and the cost of these events are increasing dramatically in recent years due to a combination of factors, of course, exposure, the values at risk, vulnerability, where we build, how we build, and then, of course, climate change, which we're seeing larger wildfires out west, more drought vulnerability out west, heavier precipitation in the central and eastern part of the United States, and of course hurricanes are really becoming more impactful along our coastal states and of course the Caribbean as well. But of course this is a global issue from a hazards point of view, from a climate point of view, and from a data point of view, and from a standards point of view. So I think we have all have a lot to contribute here and try to find best practices moving forward. Over.
Adam, what a lovely summary. Do any of the panelists have any comments on this? Because I don't think there are many other groups in the world that do such partnership working. Is that right, Adam?
Yeah, I think that a number of parts of the world have excellent data systems. I'm not clear about how the public and private sector data partnerships are organized with those systems. But again, even if you have a good data system, like the United States, we have several excellent data systems, but they still don't have comparable standards. So you have to make compromises and adjustments to integrate and to analyze the data. So even with the work we do, and we've developed a number of standards in Monte Carlo simulations to understand the data better, we still have our share of work cut out for us moving forward.
So thank you. I mean, you've raised a lot of really interesting points there. So panel, does anybody have any feedback on that? Ruth, do I see you moving towards the microphone?
Well, I was just thinking, Virginia, there's something really interesting there, isn't there, around harmonization of standards. You're absolutely right, Adam. They are critical when we are comparing and over time and across country, geography, and all other sorts of groups. And one of the things that I think that we have learned in our survey is sometimes you have to do something new and something different, and there might not be a standard, and you have to then develop it and hone it. But naturally, you'll want to try and achieve that harmonization where you possibly can. And it's about, for me, it's about balancing what you're producing now being fit for purpose and relevant, to actually also having that being future-proofed and sustainable, I guess. So it's thinking about the user need now against the user need in the future, and how do you move towards that harmonized approach. So it was violent agreement, really.
So Ivan, can I pick on you unkindly after Ruth's very helpful comment? I mean, you were looking at harmonizing things for Statistics Canada for informing policy and practice, particularly on personal protective equipment, amongst many other things I know. But how did you find working with industry to get a lot of that data to work?
Well, I think we're all working in an emergency mode, and it started with Deloitte. Deloitte was contracted out to do some work for our main partner, which is Health Canada, the health department for the whole country. And it started there, and then we jumped in as the National Statistical Agency. And I think it was because the value we could bring around standards and how to organize data and make it available and integrate it to other data sets as well. So it sits in a larger data ecosystem, so we can leverage survey data, everything, so we can integrate. And also there's a notion of trust as well. It's important that we, and I think it was probably the most important reason we were brought in this area, because we wanted to ensure that the Canadian feel okay with the fact that a lot of information on PPE procurement is sitting in a safe space and is all being integrated using good standards and everything. I don't have the exact title, but this is something I could share. There is an institution within the country which is about standards, and we're working very closely to them. That's another area in my department, making sure that we have the right partnership and work around developing standards and making sure that good practices are being used in the area of data. But I agree completely with Adam here and Ruth. It's like there's a lot to be done in this area. It's a huge, some people can spare a whole career just in this world. It's like, but you know, the benefits are immense. If you're doing it right, it's the benefit you can reap out of that. It's going to be so big.
I think it's really interesting. I don't know whether Kudsia, in the work that you've been doing in WHO, whether you've seen this happening at all.
I think that, thank you, Virginia. I think that the interest is there, and then it's not easy also, like, harmonize and all the information we gather. And of course, that there are efforts, and then there are some ways and means also that things are coming together, information are coming together. I'm also thinking that when I was listening to Adam, particularly, that yes, it is important to harmonize. Yes, it is important also to get engaged into not only collection of data. I would rather emphasize on how we are collecting and what's the outcome, and how actually we bring people together through this process. So I think that if we can pull the key stakeholders through the process, this will also help us in harmonizing. So this is how I see this the whole issue. Over to you, Rajani.
Thank you, Kudsia. I think that's a really valid point. Just to make sure that we really get the momentum going. Jim, do you have a thought on this?
Yes, I think one of the important things from my vantage point from the international side And of course, you have your national counterparts here, and they can probably speak to it. And that is, the country really needs to be able to set up a mechanism by which they can bring this data and information together and discuss among and across the agencies. Because this is a very complex situation in the sense that everything is compartmentalized. The data and statistics are set up in such a way that everybody's doing their job and et cetera, but they're not looking across and seeing how it affects the others and what the value is for them actually working together and developing common standards and protocols.
So, Jim, I think that's a really good point. Anjali, is there something you would like to add at the moment? Because we've got a really interesting question that I'm going to ask David to speak about, if he would.
Yes, so as I mentioned in my presentation, that it's important that not only the NSO gets trained, but also the stakeholders, because what we do, experience that Suriname has, I mentioned also that the UNDP has a lot of funding in the case of Suriname. What we do, when we publish our environment publication, we have a big workshop where we invite all the stakeholders, and then we have different groups. And then I will give the different groups, for instance, I will have a natural disaster group or a climate group, and then I will present to them all the indicators that various international organizations need, like the one from UN or from ECLAP. I will give them the indicators, I will explain to them the metadata and what is needed. And it helps because, like I mentioned, they collect data that they need for them. They don't collect the data for the NSO or for you guys. So they need to understand, okay, if I go into the field, I could collect some extra data or maybe, change my formatting. So this workshop that we have, it helps because they learn, I learn from them and we learn from each other. And then after the workshop, most of the times I give them the data that they received and then they revise this data. So having a meeting, it's a big workshop with almost 100 stakeholders. It's very huge, but it helps. And at the end, by the year when the publication is out, they get a nice publication as a gift. So they give me, like, for instance, one table, but they get a whole book with almost 300 tables of data. So you have to see how you could, like what was mentioned, get them all together in a meeting or in separate meetings, explain to them the indicators, the metadata, and that will work. Because like I mentioned, if you don't have money to do a specialized survey and you rely on administrative data, that is very important, the harmonization of the data, the quality, the metadata, and that is one big issue that we have at this moment. So, but it kind of works. I'm not 100% sure the quality is, perfect, but it works for us with the limited resources we have. Thank you.
Anjali, what a lovely way to do it. Quite unexpected, but why not? If it works for you, then that's brilliant. David, Biza from the Ghana National Statistic Office, are you able to join us online or shall I read your question for you? David?
I'm able to join.
Please go
ahead. If you don't mind.
David.
Yes. I think we've had lovely presentations from our panelists, and I want to congratulate them for sharing their experience with us. I think that different countries have done different things going out of scope, as we know the official statistics to be. And so I think that these are new data sources that are emerging that I think we need to, has potential to address, if you like, humanitarian issues. One of which I would want to mention, yesterday I put it across that mobile phone metadata is emerging as one of the rich data sources that we can use to generate dynamic population estimates. And so I think the challenge has been for us in Ghana when we started using this, that it's not official. So we've had a challenge to have other telecommunication agencies to provide us with, their data so we can expand the scope the coverage to be able to generate more a more representative estimates from mobile phone data. So I think that there are a whole lot of bunch of new data sources emerging that we can take hold of to address our humanitarian issues, but these are not, as we heard from one of the presenters, these are not official sources. And so for me, this platform presents an opportunity for us to also look at how we can expand the scope of official statistics to include these new data sources. Thank you, Virginia.
That's just lovely. Thank you so much, David. I mean, to me, you really summarized it in the question in the text of traditional official data seems not to be addressing the concerns in various fields. And I think this is particularly an issue in disasters. So Kudsia, you raised in your last slide something that I thought was really important. What are official statistics? Are there guidelines of exactly what WHO would expect for official statistics? And does this link to the work that you do with the national statistical offices and other colleagues?
Virginia, would you please repeat your question?
Of course. So you were good enough, Kudsia, to include in your last slide official statistics ? Something that David has raised from Ghana, from the National Statistical Office, and really talking about if traditional official data is not addressing the concerns of various fields, particularly in disasters, what does WHO feel about how we can use these less official statistical resources to provide you with the information you need? Because you run the WHO dashboard of everything COVID related, and it is an incredible resource that you have. But I think you mostly get reports under the international health regulations. But are there other things that you would use in your emergencies in that very clear statement that you have of all the different steps you need to be able to give the best data to use for dealing with the issues that you see in COVID, in emergency response and other events?
Thank you, Virginia. Yeah, I was listening to David as well, like the situation in Ghana, David just described. In terms of that types of data, like yes, official or semi-official or unofficial, and that's the reason I actually put the slide at the end, that how do we describe the official data? Because sources, I mean, for WHO, our entry point in a country is the Ministries of Health. And then plus, I would say other sectors, so mostly the government. It's not for WHO, mostly all the UN agencies. That's how we, the mechanism is, how our relationship with the country is. Then there are source of other, source of information in other sectors as well, other like private sector and then academia. So wouldn't we use the data coming from academia? Why not? Because this is supported by the research. We are using it. We are referring to this data. And then on the other hand, when it comes from particular NGOs or like, any other organization, are you not using it? So to me, like spending 24 years in the field, I see that, it's not like, I mean, you could actually define the official data in many ways. When it comes from an organization with a stamp, that organization actually support this data, that becomes official data for that organization. But then when at the recipient end, whether we are going to have that same official data to use. Like we also, in the morning session, the debate we had that what's the strength of and weaknesses of the official data. When this is very important for WHO to get authentic data, endorsed data, validated data, of course we look for the government giving data, right? But on the other hand, there are, So there, on the other hand, there are so many other data that how we can pool those data and then use them. So I think that relevantly, there's one more issue I need to bring in here, that this criteria, of course, of the official data and how we should use this data and also how we should collect this data. I can give an example. The strategic risk assessment that we do in the countries, what we do. We get information on the coping capacity, exposure, vulnerability, and then calculate the risk from the country. In the methodology, what we do, we pull in all the key stakeholders together to provide that information. So when they're providing that information, the government is there, the UNA agencies are there, all the sectors, not only health, non-health sectors are there, private sector is there, academia there, public health institutions and other institutions are there as well. So when they are providing some information within the methodology, and then every information is coming through an endorsement process. Can we use it right after that? No. We still wait, because once we do the calculation of the risk, it needs to have also endorsement from the government. So this is where my question is, and that this is the reason I've been asking this question, that what is official? So till the government endorse it, then it's official? Or like if it comes to some sort of validation, that's official? So this is it. In WHO, yes, as you mentioned, that the COVID dashboard and other information, all the information we use with a strong reference, because that's the accountability. It's not only the issue of collecting information, it's the issue of accountability, issue of trust, issue of transparency, and issue of long-term relationship as well. So a lot of things are attached to this data collection, and also the criteria of the, not criteria, type of the data. So that's what I would like to highlight here, that I would like to also hear from I know that many colleagues from the National Statistics offices are here, that how do they perceive this? Because in countries, we have WHO country offices. The relationship is there. There is some interfaces with WHO and other actors, that how this can come together. So that's something else I would like to hear. Oh, back to you, Virginia.
Well raised, Kutsia. Really good thoughts there. So Ivan, as you're representing Canada, how would you feel about reporting the data that Kutsia might need, and how you would make sure it was trusted?
Yeah, that's a big question. There's a lot to be said on this. I think that at the beginning of the pandemic, one of the things we said is, let's not stay in our own sandbox and only use our statistics or data, because we won't make it. We won't be able to provide value or official statistics, if you like, with our branding on it in a timely fashion. Timeliness was trumping everything in this regard. So we were encouraged very much by the chief statistician to go and look for alternative sources of data and see how we can use it. But there's nothing new in this. I think that in many of our regular programs, unofficial statistics or sources of information outside of our purview is often being used as an input for modeling, for example, for validation purpose, for all sorts of reasons. It's just that we never really use those so openly and in a way that we can make value-added information out of this. Mobility data is one case, you know. National Statistical Agency don't specialize in collecting mobility data. So yes, we looked at this as an organization. We were intending to use them, and of course, we came with the regular lens that we have when we look at something. Is it quality? Is it good quality? Does that respect privacy? Is it going to be well received by the Canadian public if we start using that information? What is the coverage? Is the coverage good or not? And then we take a decision. And we take into consideration ethical issues, quality issue, and everything. But I think in order to improve this is partnership with the private sector. I think the frontier between official statistics and non-official statistics will become more and more blurry as we advance. And I don't know how to deal with that, but I don't necessarily see this as a bad thing. I think if we apply good standards, and if we apply good standardship principles to it, and we're being transparent and good in communicating those things, that we can definitely bring some value added in using some of these alternative sources. But so much to be said about this.
I think, Ivan, you've raised some really good points. So let's turn to Adam. Adam, you are very much in this domain already. Do you have the research process to agree the standards? Do you have the statements that would make life easier for others? What do you think?
Yes and no, unfortunately. Yes, to a degree that a lot of this is, of course, based on peer-reviewed published literature, and we've worked with our public and private sector partners using the best data and the best practices, best methodologies. However, there are certain compound, complex hazards or even cascading events that we're looking at more deeply. For example, Louisiana was hit by 5 tropical cyclones last year. That was a record. And what that does is it creates what the private sector calls a demand surge in materials and labor. The cost, time to recover from the disaster, the cost and the time both increase. And so it's truly a compounding impact on different variables. So the same with the California and the Western wildfires. There are compounding factors both from a cost perspective, but also a physical perspective, because once they get a monsoon after a wildfire season, they get mudslides, landslides, flooding, debris flows. So situations like that complicate the methodology and the data analysis. But unfortunately, we have had so many of those events in recent years that we're getting better and better at understanding how to quantify such scenarios based on all the different data inputs and methods we have available.
Okay, I think that's a really interesting viewpoint. So, Ruth, sticking to the idea of a national approach, is there something that ONS might want to add to this? Our UK Office of National Statistics, you're on mute.
Thank you. Has to happen once, doesn't it? So I wouldn't disagree with anything that anybody has said, actually. I think the importance of what official statistics can bring is that transparency, the quality, the trust. There's something about making sure the methodology that you use is totally transparent, is a trusted methodology, and that we are able to, that it's sound, that, the information is trustworthy and valuable, I guess. I was thinking about something that we have done over the last few months in relation to the COVID statistics that we produce. So we're very aware that there's an awful lot of information in the public domain about COVID. And I mentioned in my presentation about the different user profiles. The expert users will understand the different sources and what they can be used for, their limitations and strengths. But the interested citizen, of course, would be able to understand that, but doesn't necessarily have enough interest to go and search for it. So one of the things that we produced was something called our latest insights, and we pulled together a variety of sources of data. Not all were regarded as official statistics, but demonstrating how they pulled together to provide that tapestry of information that actually, people understand. So I think for me, it's about making sure that we don't get too hung up on a label. I think we all know that we have an obligation to our profession to do the best job that we can do. Full stop. We do that. That's a given. We are as transparent as we possibly can be to ensure that people can replicate and understand our what we've done. But at the same time, I think it would be unhelpful if we only look at our narrow silo of things that this is only what I've produced. We need to look at what the full plethora of information is telling us so that we can understand that whole story.
I think that's really interesting, Ruth. So I think I just want to hang on to that. I just want to check with Anjali if you've got anything additional to add, because otherwise I'll go on to Jim.
Yes. So the only thing I can add is, as an NSO, something is official if you, like, for instance, if you do a survey, like a census or a household survey, that's considered official. But also if you get official data from a ministry, you write to the director and you get official data, through the official ways, it is seemed as official to us. But regarding disaster data, that is what I was mentioning also in my presentation. We do get data. It's administrative data. It's not always, according to the metadata or the harmonization, but we do use it, and you write a note. If you publish data that is not always as purely, official, make sure you write a note, because it's very useful data. It's too bad that you don't use it. So just always put a note, put a comment somewhere, and, so we do use it, but you will have some issues with the metadata.
Angeli, I love
you.
that approach. I think that's just fantastic. Write a note. Jim, do you want to add anything? Because I know you're really concerned about disaster losses in the work that we've been doing on weather. Is there something there that we need to reflect more fully? Because I'm beginning to head towards just thinking about this panel. Do we need a little research program on this to make sure we all feel confident? Is this something that this expert forum might need to consider?
I'd like to comment a little bit on what was being said before, and then get into that real quick. Authoritative, what does the word actually mean? It's changed its meaning over the last 50 years. The importance of having authoritative in front of information is used to carry weight, and now in the marketplace of ideas and information and everything else, it's become sort of shadowed. And what this means is that when you look at, for instance, WMO and weather forecasts, the National Meteorological and Hydrological Services, and Adam would attest to this, they used to put out forecasts that were, the winds are going to be 50 kilometers an hour or 100 kilometers an hour. The average person doesn't really understand that. They understand impacts. And so what we've done is we've gone towards looking at what the customer needs for information and relating that directly to them. And again, that goes to the marketplace. We're marketing our product as being the best that it can be, and therefore it carries weight of authoritative from the government, but it also carries weight because we're meeting the user's needs directly. And this is very, very important in anything that we're doing from an authoritative standpoint. With regards to research, it is research community is a user, for instance, for our information. It uses all the data and everything that we produce every minute of the day globally. But they're also a key stakeholder in how we develop future applications and/or databases, etc. If we look at just creating a catalog of hazards and have all the information with it that includes the scalability, the time, the temporal aspects, etc. Research really can go into that and dive into what Adam was just talking about, is complex and compound hazards. What are the effects? How do these things actually work together to create even more of a risk or potential impacts to the population and to the infrastructure? And so this is where I think one of the areas that research can really dive into when they look at hazard statistics and the impact data that is associated with that. Thank you.
So I think that's a really useful summary of many ways. Kutsia, have we answered your question, or do you feel we need a paper, a research statement? What would you like to help you address this problem that you raised so clearly in your last slide of your presentation?
Thank you, Virginia. Thank you, colleagues. I will actually add another question to the last slide now. After hearing from all of you, let me give you an example. We are talking about official data. Look at the humanitarian situations. So far, I heard that official data, meaning it's coming from government, endorsed by the government, validated by the government. In the humanitarian setup, where is this system? But we need data in the humanitarian situation, protracted crisis, where we are dealing with multiple emergencies. We need information to take the decisions. We need information to mobilize the resources. We need information so that our actions is risk-based, and actually we also manage to do the right based actions. So where do we go get those information? I would be very curious to learn as well. Because when we are talking, I was listening to the colleague talking about the standards. Whether the standards we are talking about it uniformly, like, applicable for across the world, or standard would depend on the ground reality. Because if I consider the four very core components of standard, one is the structure, content, value, and communication overall, like, it's in a nutshell. So then if you look at the communication, are we communicating with the community to get this data, or we are just generating? Is community part of this whole process, the providing information? For us, health emergency disaster managers, it's very important because we are dealing with the human and we need to reach that human, reach these people. So how do we do that? So that's the reason I think that, yes, I got some sort of answer, but that's the reason I added the second question, that what would be the suggestions? What would be the mechanism to do so? Because at the end of the day, regardless of the context, we need to do what we need to do. How do we do that?
So that was just a lovely thing to add. But I think it's really important that we think about how we could do this. And maybe this is something we share with Michael, particularly when we come to the roundup session on Thursday. So a very useful discussion, I think, with all of us. So can I go back to another question? And this is the question I particularly want to send to you, if I may, just because I need to stop getting health in there the whole way. Jerry, would you like to just articulate your question? You've just sent this this out about when the number of daily. Great, I hear you online. Yes.
Yeah. If you look on the international websites for the number of daily cases of COVID, you see these spikes every so often. It suddenly goes from 10,000 to 40,000. And you know something has gone wrong. That can't happen in one day. So it would be a backlog of cases that suddenly get reported on one day. So in the case of COVID, it can be the epidemiological date, or the date the person began to feel something, or they went for a test, or they got the test result, or went through the administration system. And those dates might be a week or so apart, two weeks. And in a period like Christmas, before Christmas, people might contract COVID, but the reporting might be in the new year when people are back to good behavior. And the statistics look like there were a lot of cases when there was good behavior rather than when the pre-Christmas bad behavior. So a statistical office we always want to begin with have you got a manual? Have you got a methodology? Can we have a working group? We don't begin with when do you need it? I'll have that for you tomorrow. We begin with the procedures. And then out of that comes consistency, comparability across countries. And that can be very tedious for policy people to minister. And it doesn't work well in an emergency. But over time, it works. It's a kind of steady Eddie approach. Thank you.
Jerry, you've raised such an important point for everything. It's not just for COVID. When does a drought start? When does any of these disaster events occur? And how do we count them? So I'm going to do it slightly the wrong way around. I'm going to go to Jim first for a very brief comment, because we're beginning to try and get a lot of these things through, and I haven't got much longer. I've only got another 12 minutes of this wonderful panel. So Jim, a very quick comment. How do we decide when an event starts, knowing that we're talking about COVID?
This is tantamount to other hazards as well. I mean, it's very elusive. And the best way to do it is to start with what you have and then do back analysis afterwards to better understand when it started. Because you're not going to be exactly right off the bat every time. There's no way.
So Jim, that's a very sensible comment, but if you've got a minister breathing over your shoulder,
yes, Yeah.
Ivan,
Yeah.
what would you like to say? You've got your minister behind you. What's going to happen in Canada?
It's a long conversation, but let me begin by saying that the responsibility of providing COVID cases statistics in Canada does not belong to the National Statistical Agency. It's so that's an easy answer, but we don't have those data. And there's I would say, an agreement, a multilateral agreement between provinces, territories, and the National Public Health Agency Canada that govern those data, and it's really hard to get access to those. But I would say that, in the first months of the pandemic, what I've seen is the standards were all over the place. And it was depending on the capacity of different jurisdictions to report. And you would see, for example, a surge of cases on Monday when files get updated, and low cases on Sunday, or things like that. So one of the strategy there was to deal with this was to use a 7 days moving average, or thing that would smooth any movement that are outside of the purview of good statistics collection. So that was one strategy, but I think it's, and I think this is what Jerry was raising, we need to be ready before it happens. It's like you don't go to the Olympics and perform something without having trained before, but nobody's interested in the training. Nobody pays attention to that. But I think that this is a good way to do it, is to build the capacity among these jurisdictions to provide timely, good quality statistics, and provide them with good training and stewardship, because you are going to get these variation. We're not like who, but it's
yeah. But that's really useful, Ivan. So Ruth, very briefly, as I represent Public Health England and you're representing our Office of National Statistics in the UK, who provides the data?
I would say we both do. We provide different data, but what we both do is provide information on the date the swab was taken and the test was conducted, which won't be the exact precise moment of transmission, but it will be the closest that we have. It's not the date that the test is the result is achieved, because you have that up and downness that we talked. And that was something that actually did come out some weeks after we started reporting, understanding the difference between test reporting date and specimen date, etc. So that's what I would suggest, Virginia, that we both do. We provide something different, but it's as close to the point of transmission as we've probably got.
Okay, so let's go to our real expert, Kudsia. Do you agree? The date of when something actually is reported, is it the day when the swab is taken or when the person is ill? Is it just
I think we are the end users. I'm just listening and learning that how the data are coming to us. So it's quite interesting also.
Okay.
I think that we rather not be very strict in such thing, because yes, it is a good idea to have very sterilized data. I would say I would use the word sterilized data. That okay, it's with no harm attached to it. But at the same time, what is the practical situation? We need some information to move forward. So how we get it? So I think that, yes, I agree that data standard is important. I agree on so many other things, the criteria, and then how we collect the data. It is also equally important to get it timely. So I think that Jerry was mentioning that explaining that how we don't get the data we get could be like coming from yesterday or tomorrow, or like, depending on the test result and everything. And also like, when it gets cleared by the official process, it is also important, like, at the end of the day, it's important that on an average and the cumulative data, how this is impacting our work. Because I shared in my presentation the strategic preparedness and response plan for COVID, because I'm giving this example because this discussion is around COVID data. If you look at the strategic preparedness and response plan, We are talking about the system. Yes, and that the system is, of course, data dependent, but not exclusively.
So Kudsia,
this is something I would like to bring to the table. Yes, Virginia.
Really good thing to bring to the table. But we in the UK, in England, we were able to celebrate our first no death from COVID last week, first day. So it was an incredible achievement and real excitement for us in the UK. But that brings me on to how do we count deaths? As another question. So I think for me, there's a research program about when do you count an event and when does it start? Jerry, you've raised something really, really important. We need to keep thinking about that. Maybe that's a research topic. And then how do we count deaths? I was wondering, Adam, if you could come in on that. How is it counted on your billion-dollar data?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So we count direct and indirect deaths from a variety of hazards that happen. For example, a tornado outbreak, that's fairly well collected. However, if we have a situation like what happened in Texas, where they had basically a power grid failure for almost a week, over 10 million plus people, the official reported statistics right now from Texas are 161 direct plus indirect deaths. But if you look at the above average total mortality morbidity, the numbers actually the average for two studies is about 750. And so to your question, I think that the more long duration events, it's almost asking, well, when does an event end? And I know that the literature talks about hurricanes or heat waves, and when they're months long impacts, whether it's a duration like a heat wave or a cleanup through like what happened in Puerto Rico with Hurricane Irma, Maria, excuse me, then you have more of a larger total count of mortality, morbidity. But really, it's still a mixed bag, and due to a lack of standards still, because the academic and the government community hasn't really come together to say, yes, this is what we should do and why we should do it.
Oops. So I think this is another research topic we need to do more on. I think we all need those sort of answers, but it's got to be done together, I suspect. I mean, you've raised such incredible bits that can I take you to a final thought? Because I think we've got another 5 minutes or so. And Anjali, you need to join in, please. We've raised some of the research gaps, some of the gaps, and how do we address them? I think it's this expert forum that gives us an incredibly rich resource to share ideas with each other to see if we can build better solutions. But I really want to know how the other gaps and how do we address them? I think we've talked about research having a role. And from the call yesterday, do we need a global framework for disaster-related statistics to improve our partnership and networking to deliver data to inform policy and practice in a timely manner? So I'm sending you a shopping list. It's such a great panel. You're all so wonderful. So do we need something that is a global framework, a global standard for disaster-related statistics, although we have incredible regional documents, which I think are fantastic and probably reflecting on the locality, but do we need something globally in which we can deliver data to inform policy and practice in a timely manner? And other gaps we need to think about in our quick panel. So can I possibly go to you, Anjali, because you are the person I think has something so much to say, and your presentation was so relevant to this. Do you need something else that would help you to do what you do?
Thank you so much for this question. So I know that there is a global framework on climate change statistics and indicators that the UNSD was working on. And that framework, I think a few weeks ago, was sent to the NSOs. And the idea of that framework, I think on my second slide, I had shown that some of the national disaster indicators are also in that framework. And there is metadata, so people can, there are links where people can learn more on how to collect that information. But one thing that I know that the UNSD wants to promote is that not only the NSOs should fill out that questionnaire, there must be collaboration with the NSO and other data stakeholders. And that's one thing that's also important in the case of Suriname. People always ask the NSO, do you have data? Do you have data on this? Do you have data on that? As the NSO, we have to provide official statistics. If it's another institute, then maybe you could, provide people with unofficial data. But as an NSO, it's by law that our data needs to be official. And that's why there is data gaps, because when we publish something, as it will be seen as national data. And if it's not official, if it's not available, then we will have data gaps. So there needs to be better collaboration, like what was mentioned. Maybe there is something out there, it's not as official as how we would like it to be. And with good collaboration, maybe there could be an environment committee or something. And then together we can harmonize the indicators. Or sometimes some stakeholders don't even know they have the data. When we give them a letter, I need data on this, they just tell me they don't have it, without knowing that they have raw data, but they don't know how to compile. They don't know, how to disaggregate. So they need help. So there needs to, collaboration is super important between NSO, the private sector, the university, the ministry. So we need to work more on the collaboration. And also, when it comes to climate change, you have a lot of training when it comes to, all the climate change laws and policies. The NSO, I mean, in our case, we know more about data. So we need to communicate more, because I get a lot of training on the data side, and I have a lot of colleagues who get training on the policy side, but we don't always communicate. So that's my takeout, is that collaboration between both. And to make sure harmonization and metadata is important. Thank you.
Angeli, I love it. You talk about partnerships, which I think for disaster and emergencies are so critical for sharing this information. And I think this expert forum has provided such a brilliant way of us trying to think this through. Your summary is truly elegant. So there is a move for the global framework for disaster-related statistics, and UNDRR has been working very hard to deliver a lot of the guidance, and now WHO has stepped in, and we know FAO has been contributing as well. Would it be sensible if we just brought it all together so it made it easier for you, all of you? So shall we start with you, Ivan? Would that be more helpful? Can we bring this into something that would be really useful and know where the research gaps are?
I think it should, and I think it should contain some recommendations as well, because the everywhere in the world, the data system is defragmented in different manners, and some recommendations or some guidelines may apply, some not. I think that gaps can be filled in different ways, and Angeli was alluding to some of these ways. But I think that the one important aspect of it is by enabling data integration and linkages, which we often underestimate the power of doing this in creating information and insight that you need to have in order to optimize your strategy. And that's a joint responsibilities between NSO, public sector, private sector, and especially frontline agencies. And there are barriers that we need to address to allow that to happen. And I can maybe classify those barriers in three buckets. There's the technical barriers. The capacity that there is in one place can vary a lot from one place to another, training, etc. More investment in data stewardship to help organizations grow their data. That's exactly what Angie was saying. Sometimes you have the data and you don't know. I think there's the second bucket is the cultural one. And it's understanding the value of data and put down the territoriality there could be and trust issue there could be with NSO, because NSO are transparent in nature. And this could be a source of worry for some partners. And maybe a third one is any legal aspect. I think some countries and some areas, there's legislation or data sharing agreement that are in place that would constitute barrier to data sharing in a timely fashion, which in turn limit a lot the articulation of optimal strategies on time. So I think those are three buckets.
I mean, Ivan, those are lovely, lovely comments, but do emergencies and disasters override these? That's one of the things we've never addressed. I don't know whether you have a final comment by any chance, Adam, if there's something you'd like to add. And then
no, I would just, I would just echo the partnerships and the standards. Certainly, if there are better standards and better sources of information for any of us, I think that we would be open to improving our methods and measures and ways. And ultimately, we're only able to report what we measure. So I think that a lot of these metrics are actually conservative, solid baselines because there are a lot of non-market measures like natural capital or the cost for mental and physical health care after disasters that we don't even capture because there's just not homogeneous data over space and time. So I think we all have a long runway ahead of us to get better, and I think partnership would be the way forward.
Brilliant, Adam. Love it. Jim, final word.
Yeah, I would add to everything that everybody said. I agree 100%. Capacity development for countries that need help in doing this. I think the more advanced countries really need to be able to have a venue to be able to impart their knowledge and experience in doing this to these countries that are challenged, not only financially but resource-wise. So we need to pay attention to not leaving a good portion of the countries to the side.
Okay, that's really helpful, Jim. I like that very much. Sorry, Ruth, do you want to go in between?
Oh no, sorry, I was no, whenever you're ready. I just didn't want to be on mute again.
Okay, so I was just looking. Do you have something in particular you'd like to add as how we try and deliver this? Because we need to start winding up, and we've got a Mentimeter to do, which I'm in trouble for not doing sooner.
Okay, so one sentence, I think. Don't underestimate the cultural the culture that you need to have. There will be continued obstacles when you're doing these things, and you need people who are prepared to continue to hurdle over them all the time. That can-do attitude is absolutely critical.
Thank you, Ruth. Kutsia, over to you while we set up the Mentimeter, please, Michael, if we may.
Oh, thank you, thank you. I can't agree more with the colleagues like Anjali, and also I think it was revalidated by Adam and other colleagues as well. Partnership, but I would like to also bring in the perspective of partnership. That yes, partnership is important for the data, and then you refer to the global framework. But I think that partnership should also build on this, and the whole process should use the partnership, not only use it, but should come through the partnership, that what type of data required, so the sectors and whole of society engagement is there, then the process, and so that it again, the engagement of the partners, and also after that resources, because collecting data, and then when we get the numbers and do the analysis is one thing. How it has been collected from the field, and then the whole process involves resources. So if there is a global framework, and I know that UNDRR is working on one, I think that these are the considerations we should be given, that how we actually, why we need a global framework. We have so many frameworks, so many ways and means. So if only reason we should need a global framework is to come together. And that way we can actually reduce the bias from the data. And then also my other point would be that, okay, global framework, but that data is coming from the community, how we link this community to the data. And this is something should the global framework address. My last point, and I want to quote you, I'm sure that you all know that Tim Berners-Lee, he's the inventor of World Wide Web. So he says that data will last longer than the system. So that's why it is very important. So we need to put all our hands on the deck to make sure that this data is correct and authentic, because it will guide the future. It will guide all our actions, what we do. Thank you, and back to you.
Oh, dear Kutsia, thank you. I think we've had a phenomenal discussion. Michael, I know we're going to you for the Mentimeter while Kansas sets up her slide, Alda, just to put the summaries together very quickly. Are we ready to go? And I'm sorry I've slightly overrun. Actually, a bit. I apologize, Michael.
We need to do it because I think we have such a nice flow in the discussion. We have so many ideas. I think we could skip that and just come to the summary, if that's fine for you.
Are you sure?
Because it will take up a lot of time now.
Okay,
yeah,
I apologize.
I
Forgive me. Kanza, can you
No,
pop
that's
up
fine,
your
thank
slide?
you.
Just trying to pop it up now. So hopefully you should be able to see something in a second, because I won't be able to see it.
It's there.
Excellent. So as everyone was talking, I was trying to sort of capture the key themes. And essentially, there's 4 key themes that have come through, which is around actually what is the data for and when are we going to collect it and when are we going to use it? It's got to be relevant, it's got to be fit for purpose today and tomorrow. And during the discussion, the things came through around the ways we could do it, so the mobile data, the real importance of having research, how we use official and unofficial sources, and also actually beginning to look widely as well beyond our little sort of silos and our spheres that we work within. And of course, the harmonization of data and having standards is absolutely critical if we're going to be successful. And making sure that actually we are comparing what we'd say apples with apples. And this is particularly important where countries, for example, have different ways of collecting data or measuring things differently. And we've seen that particularly with COVID and measuring the deaths of COVID, which sort of Jerry hopefully helpfully highlighted earlier. And also, how do we get people into the habit of making sure that when it comes to collecting data, they're thinking about the multi-sectoral team. They're thinking beyond their sphere, they're contacting the right people and making sure that the right data is collected at the right time and that it is of the correct quality so that we can use it. And finally, around partnership working in stakeholders, how do we bring the right people together, including health and other stakeholders, and also actually making sure we can get the private sector on board as well, because there's a wealth of data that we don't necessarily tap into, and there's a real opportunity to begin some of that conversation. And of course, how do we engage the citizens? Because at the end of the day, we're doing this for the public, so it's the interested citizen and a non-interested citizen. And there was a helpful point raised around speaking in the way people understand, and I think it was Adam who picked up on that, kind of the language you use, and if you're talking about speed of things and strength of things, what does that actually mean to the individual person sat in their own home or out on the street? So in summary, we've got a current situation where we've got existing initiatives. So to use the English phrase, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We don't necessarily need to create something new, but we need to build on some of the really good stuff that's already going on. But there are challenges. There always will be. That's why we haven't done it yet. So, there's a complex, compound, cascading and compartmentalized issues, and funding. A lot of this can only happen if the money is there to enable us to deliver this work. And of course, what's the status of official and unofficial data? And the discussion around having a global statistical and data framework. So what's that going to look like? Who's going to contribute to that? And who do we need to get involved in that? And how do we adopt it so it becomes the way that everybody works? But ultimately, if we can do all of that, there is massive benefit to everybody. Kind of harmonization in data, we've got a better understanding of what the current position is and also what the impact of interventions are when it comes to disaster risk reduction. So are we making a difference? And quite often I say to my colleagues when they suggest something, well, what's the so what factor? What difference is it going to make? And we heard a lot of that earlier around we're collecting the data, we want to make sure we can use it. And ultimately, if we do this well, it will have a multi-sectoral disaster risk reduction approach that works for all the people that are in that triangle there, that pyramid. Ultimately, the reason why we collect the data is so that we can improve things for the public out there. And that's what should be motivating us. And that came through strongly in the discussions today. So thank you very much to everybody who presented and discussed on the issues on the panel. I really enjoyed that and trying to quickly sort of put everything together. And apologies if I did miss something key out from the conversation.
Kanda, I'm amazed what you've managed to pull together, making it look so pretty. My goodness, well done, dear friend. But I also wanted to thank all our incredible panelists. What phenomenal contributions, what incredible engagement, and what a joy to work with you all, such experts in your field with so much to contribute. Anjali, I still don't see you, but I thank you for such wise words, as I do Ivan, Adam, Jim, Ruth, and my dear friend Kudsia. Well, I'm a health person, forgive me, it shows sometimes. And please remember that we've tried to do the hazard classification to try and reflect all the different hazards, which we hope will address some of your needs. Michael, Alda, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia. It was very interesting, this panel discussion. I've learned a lot today. I want to close up this meeting, and I don't know if there's much to say after this roundup of cancer. It was unbelievable, great. I mean, I just want to add that we must address how can we expand the official statistic to add value addition and try to increase partnership and, of course, try to define better our definitions of, our concepts to these climate change hazards and disaster. Thank you everyone for being here. I want to thank you all the outstanding speakers that we have today, all the participants, the session organizers, and I want to close up this magnificent session today. Michael, up to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. I also only want to thank everyone who was now so active in the panel, in the presentation.
Hey, my name is
Alda, Virginia, this was just wonderful, excellent. I was enjoying every minute. And Kansa, thank you very much for the nice wrap up. You did an excellent job in putting this together in one very wonderful slide. This summary was just excellent. Yeah, thanking all of you. I think we have learned a lot. We have a lot to digest and come up with really concrete recommendations for a research agenda. I think we have lots of ideas. Yeah, just let me look forward to the next few days. This meeting is not over yet. We have session 3 that will come on Thursday. So it's not tomorrow. You have a day break, so you can focus on other things. And my organizing committee can actually hopefully help me to wrap up a little bit. And it continues on Thursday with a discussion on the geospatial dimension. So we will focus on that, and I'm looking forward to that. And as usual, we have duplicate sessions, one starting at 9 o'clock Geneva time and the other one like this one at 3 o'clock afternoon Geneva time. And I hope to see many of you again on Thursday. And yeah, let me close this meeting. Thank you very much to all of you and see you soon again.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a nice day overhead.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.